The Emperor's face, now clearly former, showed only one emotion, best described by the word fucked up. Young Turhan had been sitting on the couch for a good 5 minutes, in the same position in which he had picked up the mirror and continued to stare at that very mirror. Not even look, but rather stare, frozen like a statue. Lord Baal, but... The Centaurian finally squeezed out with difficulty. How is this possible? I walk around the sofa, smiling as I watch his torment. Yes, Turhan nodded curtly. Is this some kind of trick? This is one small and modest miracle. I sit down in the chair, stroking my beard with my fingers. But it's me? You. I nod. Not a clone, not some kind of zombie or demon, or whatever it is customary to call such creatures in your religion and culture. I shrug and lean back. But, Turhan jerked, as if he had just now remembered something very important. Centauri delegation, welcome. How long have I been lying here? The Centauri ships entered hyperspace 3 hours ago, as soon as all the ceremonies and formalities were completed. Formalities. The Emperor is dead, I leaned towards Turhan, wiping the smile off my face. Long live the Emperor, as they say on Earth. Unfortunately, you had a weak heart. Dr. Franklin is an experienced physician, but even he is not omnipotent. I don't understand. Every miracle always comes at a price. Besides, I suppose, I shrug, you should soberly assess how long you would live if you returned home in such, I circle his new appearance with my hand, a form. Or will you say that I am wrong? Turhan clearly wanted to say something, but then fell silent, lost in his thoughts. This is forever, right? The duration of your new life, as well as how and what you spend it on, now depends only on you and your decisions, as you wanted. I cannot be responsible for accidents and natural disasters, but physiologically you are a completely, I would even say absolutely, healthy Centaurian at the age of 23. But the guy looked at me with genuine concern in his eyes. What will happen to the Republic? I think, I tilt my head to the side, Ambassador Kosh told you everything on this matter. I was even surprised, he's usually less verbose. Ambassador Kosh. But Turhan's eyes widened, he clearly remembered his visions. It wasn't a dream? I thought that your plans with which you flew to Babylon were worth bringing to completion. Therefore, your meeting with Kosh took place as you requested. And Dr. Franklin, I believe, I thoughtfully stroke my beard, has already visited Ambassador G'Kar to convey to him your last words. But it won't change anything, right? No one can know the future, I shake my head. Even the Centaurian gift of foreseeing one's own death can be wrong, I smile. And you are direct proof of that, in a certain sense. The mirror slipped from the Centauri's hands, falling onto the couch, but he didn't pay attention to it. Even without being a telepath, or having Behemoth nearby, I could easily tell what he was thinking about. Despite his frequent opinion about the high aristocracy of the Centauri, despite the colorful example in the person of Londo before his eyes, Turhan truly cared about his people and his republic, at least to the extent that it was generally possible, given their way of life and bureaucracy. And now he was tensely going over in his head all the consequences, immediate and more delayed, of his death. As I remembered from canon, his family was not supposed to be affected by his death, at least not to the extent that it would be a problem.
After Turhan's death, his nephew Cartasia would soon ascend to the throne, which would ultimately lead to the near-total destruction of Centauri. But with all that, Kosh mentioned a new garden in the ashes, which I did not remember in his original phrase, shown in the original story, and it made me think, could the Vorlon calculate the changes in the future, or see them? I had no idea. I suppose, Turhan exhaled, rubbing his face with his palms with effort. I should be more careful with words, and especially with voicing my desires. No, he caught himself. I am incredibly grateful to you for what you did, although I do not understand how this is even possible. But now, the Centaurian scratched his head. For the next couple of years, the road to Centaurus is closed to me. Even though I was old, there are enough subjects there who would be able to recognize my face. They, of course, will not dare to believe that I am the emperor, but...
Turhan's illegitimate son is still Turhan's son, the former emperor's side. I see that your sharp mind has not abandoned you. I nod with satisfaction. I trained him for too long. My interlocutor waved it off. Well, I'll need to introduce myself somehow. I need a new identity. But, honestly, I smile, Majesty, these are such trifles. I take out of my pocket a pre-prepared classic set of documents for a Centauri aristocrat, using publicly available sources on the internet as data. If Vir can introduce himself as some left aristocrat in the future to help the Narns, and he will be noticed only at the very end, with my capabilities, in general. Here is a complete set of documents for you and a modest sum for the first time. Enough so that you don't have to worry about food and survival.
It's up to you to decide, of course. I hand him several electronic cards and the Centauri equivalent of a passport. But I would recommend spending some time away from the large colonies of your people. Besides, I shrug, you yourself said that you dreamed of a break from state affairs. Belias Latenia, the Centaurian said thoughtfully, reading his new documents. I believe that the name Turhan, although it could be written off as given in honor of the famous emperor, could still raise additional questions. House Latenia, the former emperor frowned. As far as I can remember, there has been no information about them for the last 200 years. The less chance of stumbling upon family debts and feuds. I shrug. The data is fully traceable, right up to the last mention of the family in your databases.
Something has been lost over the centuries. Somewhere the data is questionable and unreliable, but altogether it gives an excellent picture of the last representative of the great house trying to restore, or at least not lose completely, the history of the ancestors. Well, I better not ask how you managed to do that, considering the level of protection of our genealogical databases. Turha. Velias sighed and put the documents in the inner pocket of his waistcoat. Be that as it may, I am incredibly grateful to you, Lord Baal. Still with an expression of disbelief on his face, the young Centauri stood up from the couch, giving me a deep and ceremonial bow. In the guy's eyes splashed a fierce cocktail of boundless gratitude, childish delight, fear of suddenly waking up, and religious ecstasy, mixed with the fear of a believer in the face of his god. Considering the polytheism of the Centauri, how could he not include Baal in his personal pantheon?
That would be awkward.
Have a safe journey, Velias of the House of Latenia. I stand up with a smile, giving him a return bow. I hope your journey through life would bring you more joy than before. The centaur smiled wryly, appreciating the metaphor, nodded again briefly and, taking a deep breath, turned towards the door. Your behavior, this time. And I thought that Corone was silent for so long, out of surprise or something. Yes, Corone? I smile as I follow the departed guest's movements through the station's corridors. It looks like the first thing he decided to do was go somewhere to Zocolo and get drunk. I apologize for calling you illogical and irrational before. As I now see, I was monstrously wrong.
Although the Neki's words still had the same notes of reprimanding me who was completely stunned by my own permissiveness. In the very depths of the replicator network, I saw that the girl incredibly liked my prank. And she herself was interested in how my charity would end within the framework of galactic history. She tried with all her might to smear disinformation among the huge number of data streams constantly processed by the replicators, but nope, it didn't work. You're interested too, I state the fact with a smile. I'll never admit it. An image of a proudly upturned nose and twitching ear tips came over the network, but I clearly saw the end of the phrase "but yes," which this time she didn't try to hide so much. Interlude. Michael Garibaldi let out a tired sigh. The shift had dragged on unusually long, and then there was this delegation from Centauri. He didn't know which gods or demons to thank for the fact that Emperor Turhan's death hadn't caused another war based on a monstrous diplomatic scandal, but that didn't make it any easier. The bureaucratic niceties alone, the investigation, the checking and rechecking of reports from all services, including the medical one, had Garibaldi practically ready to stick his head into a garbage disposal in the first corridor of the station he came across. But fortunately, All this madness finally ended. Turhan's body was taken to the Centauri ship. Official representatives of the Republic aristocracy conveyed assurances through Ambassador Mollari that they had no complaints about Babylon 5 and its crew. But on the contrary, they were incredibly grateful that the doctors did everything possible to ease the monarch's last hours. It was just bad luck.
Chief?
The deputy, who looked into the room, heard only the grinding of teeth and another tired sigh in response, but still risked entering.
The detainee.
What's wrong with him?
Garibaldi raised his eyes to his subordinate. He asks for a meeting.
I've had enough meetings. There were too many of them today, and yesterday.
He says it's important, boss.
Okay.
Michael waved his hand.
Bring him. Let's see what he says. If anything, I can always shoot him and say that he tried to attack me.
The head of security whispered the last words barely audible, although Zach still heard them. But common sense and perhaps solidarity with the state of the boss did not allow him to comment on the situation. Somehow it really was a tough day, but it would be better for him to stay outside the door when he brought in the detainee, just in case. Which one exactly he, however, has not yet decided, whether to help get rid of the corpse or arrest his boss. So, glancing at the man Zach had brought, Garibaldi leaned back in his chair, raising his eyebrows questioningly. You have 5 minutes.
The detainee was a fairly young man, dressed in strange clothes that were more suited to Minbari than humans. Despite his good memory for faces, Michael had clearly never seen him before, although some small details made him frown. Something small and insignificant at first glance, scratched at the very edge of perception. However, he could simply wait and hear what his guest wanted to say. Perhaps this would shed light on what was happening, at least partially. I was ordered to Babylon 5. Find Michael Garibaldi. Find you. The man looked around to make sure Zach was still outside the door and not eavesdropping, then walked closer to the security chief, pulling a data crystal out of a small pocket on his belt. I have a letter to give you. A letter? Garibaldi looked at the crystal suspiciously. From whom?
I think the detainee carefully placed the information carrier on the terminal in front of Michael. Its contents should explain everything to you. Garibaldi, frowning darkly, drummed his fingers on the surface of the terminal, looking from the object to his interlocutor and back again. Finally, grimacing, he took the crystal, rising from his chair and demonstratively slowly inserting it into the socket intended for this purpose. Losing. Michael measured the stranger who was standing patiently with his gaze, then turned it to the display that had turned on, and the caustic remark that was ready to escape his lips remained unuttered. Hello, old man. Jeffrey Sinclair looked at him with a slight smile. Long time no see. I entrusted this letter to an assistant who swore to deliver it to you even at the cost of his life. Raising his eyebrows in surprise, Garibaldi looked at the man who nodded in agreement. I do not only fulfill the duties of an ambassador representing the Earth Commonwealth. The president does not know about this, Sinclair smiled, and I think he should not know. Darkness is approaching us, Michael, sighed the previous commander of the station. And the Minbari, some of them, have been preparing for this for a long time. My man is one of the rangers. There are Minbari among them, but mostly they are people. We gathered them here, on Minbar. We prepared and continue to prepare them for the coming battle that awaits us. Pause. Michael stopped the recording. We've been watching the key locations we know about for 2 months now. The ranger nodded. We're an army, Mr. Garibaldi, albeit a small one. But that's only until our ranks grow. Do they supply you with weapons, too? We have friends, the man shrugged. That's all I can tell you for now. Resume. The frowning security guard turned back to the display. They must patrol the border, listen, observe, and return with reports that are too delicate and important to be transmitted by conventional means. They are my eyes and ears, Michael. If you see them, consider that you see me. In the name of our friendship, I ask that you assist them. If I could say more, I would say, my friend, but many believe that the time has not yet come. Sinclair sighed sadly. Stay close to the Vorlon, and beware of the shadows. They come when you allow yourself to forget about them. Damn it, Garibaldi exhaled. The man wanted to say something else, had already managed to open his mouth and turn to the ranger, but at that very moment, a breathless Zach ran into the office, and from his bulging eyes, the boss was able to clearly understand that something extremely unpleasant and unexpected had happened. What? Ambassador G'Kar, Zach exhaled. The embassy sector. Your mother. What the hell is going on? Arr! Michael almost spat on the floor, holding back at the last moment.
Don't fly away from the station. Waving away Sinclair's messenger with a gesture, Garibaldi literally ran out into the corridor. Fucking day. Another fucking day at the fucking station. Zack, who had come running and so expressively shouted the name of the Narn ambassador, somehow forgot to mention the important detail that the said ambassador was trying with great enthusiasm to get to the cabin of the Centauri Republic delegation, burning with an insatiable desire to tear off the comb of Ambassador Mollari and shove it somewhere in a hole not very suitable for this. When Garibaldi and his deputy ran into the right corridor, there were already a good dozen security personnel there trying to calm the enraged ambassador, if possible, without using particularly harsh methods. Unfortunately, the Narns themselves were somewhat stronger than a human, and even more so in the state of rage in which G'Kar was.
In any case, only Captain Sheridan, in tandem with an additional detachment of guards, who clearly pointed their service weapons at the Narn, managed to calm the enraged ambassador. Even though the conflict had been resolved relatively peacefully, with the exception of minor bruises among the security personnel, a couple of sprains, and 2 kilometers of dead nerve fibers among all participants, Garibaldi was not particularly happy. He clearly understood that this was only the beginning. Sooner or later, information about the Centauri attack on the Narn colony, which was the cause of the outbreak, would reach the rest of the Narn people, and something would have to be done about it. When G'Kar became completely communicative, "A fucking day at a fucking station," Garibaldi repeated with feeling, leaning back in his chair in the captain's office, where all the senior officers of the Babylon had gathered to figure out what to do next with the latest brewing mess. "Don't look at me as a woman, Michael," Ivanova sighed tiredly. "If you want to swear, swear."
"No, I'll refrain."
"Okay, gentlemen." Sheridan, who had been sitting with his hands on his clasped palms the whole time, looked up at his subordinates. "What are your suggestions regarding the situation? As I understand it, Ambassador G'Kar is only the first swallow of the coming fun." Garibaldi spread his hands. "And that means we'll have an extremely fun few days, at the very least. I'll place additional security in the embassy sector and in places of mass gathering, but yes, I understand. It's not a guarantee." The captain nodded. "Ivanova, did Ambassador Mollari comment on the message we intercepted?" "No." The woman shook her head. "But I believe he will. His attaché has placed a request for an extraordinary meeting of the council, for an important announcement. For,
If my memory serves me right, the commander thought for a moment. Yes, the day after tomorrow in the afternoon. I see. And it all started so well." Sheridan rubbed his temple. "Nothing from the other delegates?" "They're keeping quiet for now." Susan shook her head. "If anything happens, I'll let you know." Garibaldi frowned, running the events through his mind, and in light of the latest news, the letter from Sinclair looked more and more gloomy with each passing second. He had no proof, and no one could have any, but the mythical gut feeling of a professional paranoid told Michael that this was it. It was starting. So far, slowly, but the first stone has rolled down the mountain, as they say. "Mr. Garibaldi?" Sheridan called out to the man. Yes, sorry, Captain, I was lost in thought. And perhaps I should tell you something." "Tell me." John frowned in surprise. "Did something else happen to us?" "I'm not sure if this is all connected, but
Anyway, a message fell into my hands. It was delivered by one person, and this message is extremely disturbing, especially in light of recent events." "What kind of message?"
"Something is coming," Michael sighed. "Something very bad."
"Michael," Ivanova spread her hands. "But that doesn't mean anything, just general words. What was in the message, and who was it from, for that matter?"
"I can't say now."
"Mr. Garibaldi, do you realize what this looks like?" Sheridan stood up from his desk, walking toward the head of security.
"I understand, Captain." The man nodded with a sigh. "And I'm not happy myself. I'll be able to say something else, I hope, but not now. The main thing we need to understand is that in the near future, none of us will be laughing. There are certain people who are collecting information, preparing Michael hesitated. Even this information may be too much. But otherwise, I simply won't be able to convey the main thing to you.
Can you at least trust your source?
Susan looked closely at the man. Garibaldi was pleased to realize that the woman had asked the question in this way. Can his source be trusted? And not, can he be trusted? After a few seconds of silence, weighing his next words, Michael finally nodded. He has good recommendations. I would even say excellent ones. And despite the importance of the issue, you continue to hide the details from us? John asked discontentedly. Yes, sir. Why? I gave my word. Garibaldi stubbornly clenched his jaw, meeting the captain's gaze directly. And I should believe you, not knowing where the information came from? Not knowing in essence anything except the darkness approaching us? After all, I can order you to tell everything. Sir, Garibaldi shrugged. If I tell, they won't trust me with any more information, knowing that the authorities can loosen my tongue at any moment. It will be bad for the reputation, Captain, sir. Michael chuckled maliciously. Okay. Sheridan just shook his head. Deep down inside, he was extremely approving of his subordinate's actions. Orders were orders, but loyalty to principles and one's word were often much more important and brought much more benefit. Continue. Since the beginning of the year, we have been constantly hearing from various sources. Garibaldi put his hands in his trouser pockets, starting to pace around the office, that some powerful race which we have not heard of before is approaching us, and my source actually confirms the veracity of these rumors. And another conclusion is even worse, Michael sighed. In light of recent events and such a brazen attack by the Centauri, their government may be somehow connected with these aliens. They are clearly supporting our fanged neighbors. You want to say, Ivanova raised her hand, that the attack on Quadrant 14, where the Narn base was destroyed, was carried out by this race, not the Centauri? I can't rule out such a possibility. If that's the case, Sheridan suddenly froze, deep in thought. They must be doing everything they can to hide their presence so that not a single bit of information leaks into the wrong hands. Whether he had been infected with his subordinate's eternal suspiciousness, or whether there really was something in common, John suddenly caught himself thinking that the unknown ship with which his Calvados had entered into battle fit very well, he would even say perfectly, into the picture of a new, unknown, highly developed civilization cooking up its dark deeds under the noses of others. And this thought made a thin, icy stream run along the captain's spine. Not fear, no, but a feeling of extreme discomfort from the events taking place and the assumptions arising. What information? This is just our speculation. Sheridan's rule number 29. Always make your opponent think you know more than you actually do. If your source is right, the man looked at Garibaldi, perhaps we can play on this in our favor. Do you have a plan? I wouldn't call it a plan, Sheridan shook his head, but we'll probably be able to smooth out the consequences here and now. It won't bury the hatchet between the Narns and the Centaurs, but the man spread his hands. Perhaps we'll get some extra cards in our hands and figure out what to do next. I understand you, nodded Ivanova. Then I'll go follow the news and prepare for the meeting. And I'll drink a liter of coffee, Garibaldi sighed. And I'll issue a pack of overtime for my subordinates, with a reserve, for a week ahead. With a curt nod, the officers left the office, leaving the captain alone. Sheridan indeed had something to think about. Even back then, when his first mate reported to the men about the unknown ship they had encountered, John immediately remembered all the tales about life in hyperspace that he had heard from Maynard on the day of their memorable arrival at the station. And let's be honest, these tales had been circulating for years, and only a deaf person with no interest in such matters had heard anything at all. And now this, an unknown race, probably connected with the attack on the Narn colony. Sitting down in his chair, the captain took a crystal with the recording from the Calvados cameras out of the safe and began to replay that battle once again. Yes, perhaps several such ships could have destroyed the colony's defenses without noticing any resistance, especially if they had attacked unexpectedly, especially if the ship had not shown everything it was capable of in the battle with his frigate. And it looked very, very much like that. The very next day after Prendick's report, Sheridan sent a request to the Fleet Command on Earth, attaching to the lieutenant's official report marked Top Secret this very record with Prendick's own notes and his comments and thoughts. There was still no answer, as well as to his first request about the future fate of the ship. However, now, Against the background of the events taking place, he was rather glad that Babylon 5 had at its disposal, albeit one, but a fully fledged combat-ready frigate, especially one that had shown itself from the best side in its first combat sortie. Knowing the nature of the Centauri and Narns, John would have preferred to have a couple of heavy cruisers with full ammunition and several infantry squads near the station. But even so, it was much calmer with the Calvados nearby, especially since minor repairs, replacement of destroyed armor plates, and replenishment of the ship's ammunition were almost completed. Returning it to combat duty again.
Sighing, the captain took another look at the ink stain of the alien ship, frozen in the middle of the frame at the moment of the shot, took out the crystal with the recording, putting it back in the safe, and rose from his chair, straightening his jacket. He needed to talk to Ambassador G'Kar. Sheridan hoped that the Narn had already regained enough sanity for a business-like conversation on an important topic. Entering the council hall, I followed the emotions of everyone present with interest. No, I hadn't become a telepath, and Behemoth wasn't with me either. It's just that all their thoughts were literally written on their faces. Everyone present who was even slightly in the loop of events, and there were an absolute majority of them simply due to their professional duties, understood that some kind of unhealthy nonsense was starting to happen. Recently, literally just now, during an official visit, Emperor Turhan dies, leaving the Centauri Republic without a father king, and what do these fanged comrades do? That's right. They take and destroy one of the border colonies of the Narn Regime, completely demolishing the planet's defenses and destroying a military observation outpost. Am I the only one who thinks this is such a coincidence that there's no point in putting a sample? Well, okay. I'm perfectly informed about what's really going on, but the rest of us definitely at the very least suspect something. Ladies and gentlemen, Sheridan, who entered last, looked around at everyone present, making sure that all the ambassadors, members of the council, had arrived. I believe we can begin. Everyone is here as far as I can see. Ambassador Mollari nodded to the captain, his face still sporting an explosive mixture of innocence and indifference as he rose from his chair. And so, esteemed ambassadors, he winced at the word esteemed as the Centauri glanced at G'Kar, who sat with a gloomy expression, but the need to continue kept Londo from the mockery that was bursting out of his mouth. As you may already know, some time ago there was a military incident on the border of Narn and Centauri territories. G'Kar twitched his cheek. A military incident, the Centauri ambassador repeated emphatically. My government is currently assessing the results of the operation so that Ambassador Mollari, Sheridan interrupted Londo. What will happen to the civilian population of the colony? As far as I know, there are over 250,000 Narns living there, and they have nothing to do with the military base that was in the system. Will they be allowed to return to their homeland? I'm afraid, Captain Sheridan, Londo shook his head. We can't allow that. But rest assured, Mollari smiled, my government will find a suitable occupation for them. In concentration camps? Delenn spoke up, extremely displeased. It's just retraining. We don't intend to exploit anyone, especially not in such a barbaric way. You should know, Ambassador Mollari. Sheridan looked closely at the Centauri. I have just received orders from my government to send a team of observers to the colony. Their purpose will be to check how the civilian population is being treated and to prevent violations of their rights. They won't let them in there, Captain, the ambassador chuckled. Nevertheless, the group will be sent, or would you like to fire on the Earth Commonwealth ships? John narrowed his eyes, bringing his face closer to the thoughtful ambassador. I wouldn't advise you to do that. For all our peacefulness, we really don't like it when they shoot at us. It was interesting to watch the ambassador's expression change. Sheridan had probably chosen the most productive way of conducting a dialogue. If people had arrived on the colony, they would have had a non-zero chance of sorting things out and understanding that even the largest Centauri fleet would not have been able to destroy the Narn military contingent as quickly and cleanly as the Shadows had done. And then Londo would have had some very persistent questions. The observers will assess the situation, Sheridan continued, shrugging. They will talk to the residents and prepare a detailed report. And I assure you they will find out how you managed to capture the colony so quickly. I am sure, Ambassador Mollari,
everyone here is very interested in this, I think, after a long pause for thought, Londo, although grimacing, still managed to save face and admit, albeit a minor, but defeat. I will be able to convince our authorities to allow the civilian population of the colony to return to the metropolis of Narn.
I suppose the Centauri gave the captain a smile. In this case, if we show a gesture of goodwill, observers will not be needed. Right, Captain Sheridan?
On that condition, I suppose, yes, John smiled contentedly, nodding. I am sure we will appreciate your gesture of goodwill. Ambassador G'Kar? Delenn turned to the Narn, who was clearly waiting patiently for a chance to voice his own thoughts. Yes, the ambassador nodded, closing his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them, behind the veil of pain and worries for his people, only pure and unclouded rage splashed in the direction of Mollari, who was standing there. I am incredibly grateful to you, Captain. G'Kar stood up, bowing to Sheridan, for your help and attempt to somehow smooth over and ease the situation, but before coming here I managed to receive a government communique. For 100 years, the Centauri Republic occupied our lands.
Мишем даже вишонастенду камбичонała tym. Piechodzino imionych trezałnia w komosio zaniejażona w kożardusie znobuście zaluzeczy naś karze uzłażyce szeszkaz, bele druga mięsia uzewszówka. Udunie trawadna publikę nejdanni maracji. Niedziona rożmy jełszyszczów szamie kanarze uzewszemiera. Mysiendarze, piechodzie moj norbowe usurze, kono zargo możerdu jaka łarazę. Niedieuleny w korochu morago wsi załamieja. Ponarzuje je anisia zełzaszaciów każardzi się zanieżanowki kachowca jełszardziża. Kono na załądania opawa rośnia założeni. Kiedoby wyronia karże uwniech samia. Janie, kowkach to tym się rądze to rochkę.
And while Londo's face, at the cost of his monstrous endurance and self-control, did not move a single muscle, and Ambassador Kosh's expression was unreadable even in more exciting moments, the faces of Sheridan and Delenn clearly showed a mixture of uncertain regret and shock. They understood perfectly well what the potential threat of a military confrontation between two space powers, whose representatives and citizens were in such close proximity on such a small space station, was. Ambassador Kosh, who turned his head at G'Kar's first words, made an inarticulate sound more like a sigh, practically closing the diaphragm of his eye. At the same time, he clearly looked in my direction, and I was ready to bet that with his démarche, he meant his brilliant phrase, "You are an outsider, do not interfere." Yeah, righto. Doesn't anything bother you, my energetic friend? I raised an eyebrow, addressing Kosh, who had clearly greased his skis and was about to leave our company. Kosh froze, looking at me intently with a squint. You know perfectly well the true background of what's happening, don't you? Or are you satisfied with everything? I tilt my head to the shoulder, and that's why you don't do anything. Yes, Kosh, having returned his eye to its normal size, uttered only one word in the best traditions of the Vorlons, then swayed smoothly and simply headed towards the exit of the council hall. Well, Londo blinked after Kosh's uncomprehending gaze and turned to the others present. I suppose that's all. Everyone has spoken, and I no longer need to be in your company. The Centauri followed Kosh's example, leaving the council chamber, leaving the four of us. Delenn and Sheridan's looks were much more eloquent.
The Minbari looked at the patron of her race with a surprised look, frowned slightly, and having briefly nodded to everyone present, quickly followed, clearly intending to get some explanations firsthand. But Captain Sheridan looked like a man who clearly understood that something extremely important had just happened here, something capable of having a critical impact on the future of the galaxy. But what exactly he had seen? It was already beyond his understanding, unpleasantly scratching his consciousness. Lord Baal. John turned to me with a frown. Captain Sheridan? I raised my eyebrows innocently. Could you explain what just happened between you and Ambassador Kosh? Some knowledge gains its value, I smile, if it is acquired independently, Captain. I suppose, for the situation here and now, it is not so important. But, I spread my hands, if you, having come to some conclusions,
want to discuss it. You know where my cabin is.
The captain looked from me to G'Kar and back, but seemed to have decided not to continue the conversation right now. Captain Sheridan. G'Kar shook his head with a heavy sigh and looked up at the man. Ambassador, thank you for stopping me in the corridor. And thank you for your help with the civilian population. If, of course, Centaur keeps its word. Unable to find the right words, John simply nodded to G'Kar. Gentlemen. With a short bow, the Narn left the room with a tired gait. He clearly had something to think about and worry about now. And all sorts of high-minded philosophical intrigues were the last thing on his mind. Taking advantage of the moment, I did exactly the same, nodding to the commander of Babylon 5 and treacherously leaving him in proud solitude to digest what had happened. Chapter 39. Sweet Maiden Joys, How Fighting Brings People Together. Yuri Basilev. Interlude. Did you call me, Director? Alfred Bester knocked on the course director's office, carefully opening the door. Yes, Mr. Bester, come in. The call from the higher-ups was unexpected for the telepath. He had spent the last time at the Academy conducting a course of elective lectures for young telepaths who had expressed a desire and demonstrated abilities for subsequent entry into the ranks of Psi-Supervision and, therefore, was on Earth. His last significant assignment was a flight to Babylon 5 in search of rebellious telepaths, but that mission was successfully completed, albeit with some help from the station's regular telepath, Talia Winters. He submitted the report on time, in a rough version, and even sent it ahead of the locomotive via a service communication channel directly from the liner as soon as it left the Epsilon Eridani system. So what was the reason for the call? How are things at the Academy? The course director hospitably pointed to the chair in front of him.
Thank you. Alfred nodded, sitting down. Everything is in perfect order at the Academy. I believe this class will have at least 10, maybe 15 level 12 telepaths who are very enthusiastic about joining the oversight. Oh, that's wonderful news. However, the man cast a thoughtful glance at the operative. I didn't call you so much to discuss routine work. I'm listening to you, Director. The telepath responded with a collected and attentive expression on his face. Some time ago, you flew to Babylon 5 on a mission to search for rebel telepaths. Yes, sir, Bester nodded. As I reported in my report, everything went, albeit not without surprises, but quite successfully. The group of telepaths planning to hide from the eyes of the Corps was destroyed. Unfortunately, I was unable to bring any of them back, but the main thing is that we plugged this leak. Babylon will no longer be used as a transit point for fugitives, and they themselves, the man shrugged. I made sure that rumors about their fate, along with the official version, Alfred made quotation marks with his fingers, regarding the reasons for their escape and, in general, further events, leaked among the young telepaths. Commendable, the director nodded thoughtfully. I don't think this will solve the problem at its root, but it will definitely cool the ardor of the particularly dissatisfied. I think so too, Director. What can you say about Lord Baal? Lord Baal? Bester frowned in confusion. As far as I know, you had a personal meeting with him. Yes, Bester shrugged. Under his care is a young telepath, Alice Belden, who asked for diplomatic asylum in the Gua'uld territory. I assumed that I could convince her to return to Earth and to the Corps. Potentially, she could be level 10, perhaps higher. After training, of course. But, the telepath spread his hand. It seems that in this case, her opinion of the Corps has already been formed.
And it's not the most rosy, that's not so important. The director waved his hand. I heard rumors that the Gua'uld ambassador has some kind of pet. The man was distracted for a moment looking for something among the documents on his desk until he finally pulled out a small note, casting a quick glance at what was written. That looks like a large black cat with 2 tails, and has telepathic abilities. A telepathic cat? Director, are you serious? Alfred stared at his boss. So you want to say that these are just rumors? Of course. The telepath looked at the note in the director's hands with genuine bewilderment. How can an animal, even an alien one, be a telepath? This requires a highly developed brain, consciousness, and a domestic animal on a space station. Silence reigned in the office for a few seconds, each of those present evaluating what had been said and heard. Bester, sincerely not understanding where the chief could have gotten such a crazy idea, was replaying the events of that meeting in Lord Baal's cabin in his head. But everything was completely ordinary.
Well, if you don't count the walls made of gold and the long-distance call from Babylon 5 to the Goa'uld outpost, as the man knew, located on the opposite end of the galaxy. And the route that the young telepath had sent him. But Alfred, in general, had long been accustomed to such an attitude. His business was to do business, and not to reflect on every dissatisfied person he met. The telepath turned his head to the quiet rustle of the door opening behind him, and then his consciousness faded. Alfred only managed to feel a short prick somewhere at the base of his neck, and the warmth and relaxation spreading throughout his body.
The director, who continued to sit at the table, cast a thoughtful glance at his subordinate and nodded briefly to the 3 men in corps uniform who entered the office. Conduct a full scan. Check especially carefully for bookmarks and changes in the personality matrix. Of course, Director, one of the telepaths nodded, while his 2 companions carefully picked up the Psi policeman under the arms and carried him out of the office into the corridor. I'm waiting for your report on the results. The man nodded briefly and left the room after his colleagues, leaving the extremely thoughtful director alone. And he certainly had something to think about. Bester wasn't lying. The man could say that with complete confidence, even without resorting to a deep scan. Alfred had proven himself to be a reliable and loyal employee of the Corps, and the director himself was an excellent judge of people, especially his subordinates. And with all this, the Psi policeman sincerely believed that a telepathic animal was impossible. And that meant only 2 possible scenarios. Either the information received from 3 independent sources was incorrect, or the telepath was influenced. Telepath P12. And even though the first option seemed much more likely, the head of the Corps simply could not physically afford to discard the second possibility, simply because he understood what it meant. Ambassador Kosh's behavior at the council meeting was expected, although rather illogical. Even without being a telepath, I was 146% sure that the Vorlon perfectly understood where the roots of the conflict between Centauri and Narn were growing from. And at the same time, who exactly destroyed the Narn colony? And with all this, he did absolutely nothing to somehow influence the situation.
The Shadows and the Vorlons have been playing king of the hill for thousands of years, trying to determine whose ideology is more correct, who should lead the races inhabiting the galaxy to prosperity, and in what way. But the more I thought about this system, the more information the replicators analyzed, the more I came to the disappointing conclusion that such a competition makes absolutely no sense. Against this background, it is absolutely not surprising that at the end of this cycle, when the humans and the Minbari try to throw off the leash, both sides will simply wave their hands at the protracted laboratory experiment and decide to simply purge the test subjects at once in order to start over. And in light of such conclusions, a very definite question arose. How does this concern me, if it concerns me at all?
For almost a year and a half of presence on Babylon 5, I have positioned myself with all my might as an inactive observer, intervening only in those events, a different outcome of which could either emphasize my position or would not change anything at all. Well, and along the way, I collected new technologies. Where would we be without that? But now, Narn declared war on Centauri. Babylon 5 and Minbar will certainly sympathize with the people of G'Kar, and since, according to my recollections, they have no chance of winning, especially considering the Shadow's stake on Centauri, Sheridan will be harnessing for the forces of light, simultaneously dragging all potential allies into the events. How likely is it that he will come to my humble person as soon as the heat is on? The replicator network was already giving a figure of as much as 45.345%, and this is at the very beginning of the mess.
The probability of an attempt to recruit me from the opposite side was a slightly smaller but still quite significant figure of 37.1246%. The Shadows, being supporters of the struggle for the sake of development, may well see in me an excellent way to push the local species towards an even greater escalation of the conflict. And they certainly will not hesitate to use this method. Can I afford to participate in this show? Yes, already the resources at the disposal of the replicators are enough to absorb the home planetary systems of all the younger races represented on Babylon. And if you approach the issue wisely, you can even include the Vorlon Empire and Zadum in this list, even taking into account the unpredictable factor in the person of Lorien. Do I want to do this, and what will I get for it?
Well, that's what I'm talking about. Only,
Quite unexpectedly, I caught myself thinking that I was seriously weighing all the pros and cons of the decision to commit galactic genocide for the sake of extremely murky and unclear goals. I was bored? An intersystem war between two states was looming in the galaxy, with the participation of a third party capable of destroying both of them, as well as their neighbors and all random witnesses. And I was bored? Fortunately, life in the universe was saved. A report came through the replicator network about the successful completion of two extremely important and large-scale projects that had been going on since the moment I appeared in this world. The younger ones finally finishing with a file, the existing technologies, and their transfer from Naquadah and Naquadria to Quantum 40.
However, given the analog of MNT that the technomagies used for their witchcraft, that they had received at their disposal, almost any resource-dependent issue was no longer so acute. It would be energy, and you can synthesize anything. And this was the second significant result based on the structure of the miniature puncture into the zero space received from Elric, the replicators successfully created in metal, his older relative. In fact, it was already a full-fledged power station, occupying an area comparable to a standard hoodtack, and in nominal energy output comparable to the costs required for a fleet of such hoodtacks to destroy a small planetoid. Completely. Well, the test sample was assembled on a remote asteroid in a neighboring star system, purely out of paranoid safety precautions. I knew perfectly well what an explosion of such a device could turn my cozy lab into if something went wrong at the most crucial, and it never happens otherwise, moment. No, the vast majority of replicators on the planet would only lick their lips and say, more. But Alice, a cozy laboratory complex with a park and living space and smiling necks, could be given up for good. Nevertheless, contrary to all the laws of the genre and plot twists, the launch went smoothly, and the device, humming steadily and barely audibly, began to generate a stable flow of energy exceeding the energy consumption of other planets entirely. Having made sure that the process was not going to go haywire, that there were no ominous holes in other worlds emerging around from which demons and other nice neighbors would crawl out, dissatisfied with the theft of their energy property, I rubbed my hands in anticipation with an extremely satisfied look, figuratively speaking. Perhaps, now that the problem of excess energy was effectively solved, I could really turn my attention to developing some projects that had previously been put aside as not having primary importance and critical significance. That is why I sent a group of ships with a supply of building materials to the system I had found earlier, and with the order to assemble exactly the same installation and a small mining star processing plant on the basis of the celestial bodies there. I needed neutronium. And now I had everything I needed to extract and process it. Koroni and Yuki asked us to upgrade their platforms. That's what we'll do. But why stop at just adding a separate technomagic module? Let's treat the girls to something more substantial. Interlude. No movement. No complaints. No noise. Ambassadors, traders, troublemakers, all peacefully sleeping in their beds, with an expression of pure happiness on her face. Ivanova said, comfortably settling into one of the chairs on the bridge, throwing her feet up on the terminal in front of her. I love this time of night. Well, technically speaking, one of the controllers leaned back in his chair with a smile. There is no night in space, and time is a meaningless concept when you don't think about it. You really know how to ruin everything. Commander, incoming hypertunnel, 6 ships. Ivanova cast a displeased glance at the man with a message. Well, there you go. You jinxed me, but sat up straight in her chair, looking at the display. As the dispatcher had reported, 6 ships were entering the Babylon system. Judging by the identifiers, they belonged to the Earth Space Fleet. And 10 seconds later, the commander saw them, and with her own eyes, the transition zone farm was illuminated by an opening funnel into which the military ships slowly flew one after another. They are requesting a berth on code 10. And what a night it was, Ivanova sighed. Inform Captain Sheridan and warn the docking crew. Code 10 belonged to the military, implying the need to use part of the originally civilian infrastructure to which the diplomatic station belonged for the needs of the fleet or army. Judging by the composition of the arriving fleet,
which consisted of 1 Nova-class dreadnought and 5 landing ships, the command decided to arrange a small military brawl somewhere. Ivanova sighed heavily and shook her head. As was always the case, no one was waiting for them on Babylon 5.
General Franklin had long since gotten used to this state of affairs, but he still couldn't resist the pleasure of grimacing with displeasure as he stepped down the ramp of the transport shuttle onto the station's deck without seeing a single officer to greet him. However, this state of affairs was entirely understandable. It would have been a strange and even stupid decision to notify the command of the diplomatic station that a combat ship was flying towards them, then heading to another sector and having a very specific combat mission. No, he didn't consider the station's crew traitors or anything like that, but due to the nature of his service, the general had long ago realized that the proverb, "If two know, even a pig knows," which was popular in some countries on Earth in the 20th century, has much more real grounds than one would like. Even over a secure government channel, even with tricky encryption. Secret information you transmit can always be intercepted, decrypted, and transmitted to where it shouldn't have been transmitted. And even if you were lucky 100 times before, this does not mean that you will be lucky even once more after. But nevertheless, the absence of those meeting him touched some strings in the depths of the experienced general's soul. Just a little. The adjutant accompanying him at such moments preferred to simply silently follow the commander, pretending to be his shadow and trying to pretend that he didn't really exist there until the moment when the general needed something. "Sir!" Suddenly, like a jack-in-the-box, a man in the uniform of a Babylon 5 officer practically ran out from around one of the turns, saluting the general who turned at his hail in strict military style. "Captain John Sheridan, Station Master of Babylon 5. Welcome aboard, sir." "General Richard Franklin." The man nodded briefly. 356th Legion. Having considered the mutual bows and scrapes to be complete, the general made a sharp movement with the handle of the riding crop, which he held under his arm, pointing forward, inviting Sheridan to continue moving down the corridor. "Please forgive me for the delay and the lack of a meeting, sir. We were not warned of your arrival." "Nothing surprising. This is a secret mission," the man nodded. "I will instruct you. In the meantime, place me and my people." "How many are we talking about, General?" John tensed. 25,000 people. "But 25,000? Sir, we don't have that much space." "Find them!" General Franklin answered sharply. However, a second later he sighed, softening his tone. "Try, Captain. We will stay with you for several days. I cannot and do not intend to keep people on the ships all this time. They need rest." "Yes, sir." "Proceed, Captain." Considering the conversation over, the general slightly quickened his pace, heading for the elevator, leaving Sheridan behind. John sighed resignedly, watching the senior officer go. 25,000 people. Babylon 5, of course, could afford even more inhabitants on top of the resources already available. The station had a huge reserve, but space. Where would it accommodate so many people? And they would not just be workers. On the way to the general, he managed to glance at the information Ivanova had received about the arriving ships. The overwhelming majority of passengers were Marines. Soldiers. Without even seeing them in person, Sheridan simply expected numerous problems in advance. Soldiers were never a particularly calm and reliable contingent, especially outside their units, especially when an officer turns away, especially on the eve of some large-scale military operation. Wincing, the men quickly headed towards the same elevator that had just taken the general away from him, and especially Mr. Garibaldi had just had a lot of worries. "So, since everyone is here," General Franklin looked at Sheridan, Ivanova, and Garibaldi, who entered the conference room and immediately stood at attention. "Let's begin, gentlemen." The man gestured sharply for the officers to take the chairs in front of his desk, and with a second gesture he motioned for his adjutant to start a presentation on the display behind him.
The screen flickered, and on it was reflected a planet from the Schlassen triumvirate that was surprisingly familiar, at least to Sheridan, accompanied by a short reference and description of the object. "This is Agdor," Richard began, sitting half-turned to the screen, confirming the captain's assumption. "The third planet of the Schlassen triumvirate. I believe you all know that Agdor is currently in the midst of a civil war.
The Schlassen government has asked us for help, and we will provide it."
"Excuse me, sir." Sheridan frowned in surprise. "There must be some mistake here. Yes, their embassy asked for help a week ago, but I received orders to refuse them." "You are right, Captain," the general nodded. "And this order remains in effect until the Senate officially announces our participation." "What is your task?" Ivanova decided to clarify. "Operation Sudden Death is a pinpoint strike on the rebel base in Matoka." The general inserted a crystal with data, displaying satellite images of the territories mentioned on the terminal display. "It is for this reason that the command chose Babylon 5 as a transit point for our route. As soon as the Senate announces our participation, we will make a hyperspace jump and fall to the enemy. I am not afraid of this word." The general smiled. "Like snow on the head."
With all due respect to you, General, Sheridan shook his head. I was in Matoka during one of the expeditions. This is not just a fortress, it is literally a death trap. That's why there's a second reason for choosing Babylon, Richard Franklin shrugged. I'm counting on your help in planning the attack. You have experience, Captain. We'll take the rebel leaders by surprise. 25,000 legionnaires and a whole dreadnought to boot, Garibaldi squinted skeptically. They simply can't be sudden. How can you possibly keep an operation secret? Officially, this is just a transfer of a contingent to Io. Even my officers and guards do not know the real state of affairs. And when the truth comes out, it will be too late. We will be ready to strike. How much time is left before the start? A few days, Captain. The general looked at Sheridan. We have enough for planning and for, the man chuckled, distributing gifts. Gifts?
Ivanova thought she had misheard, but Franklin only smiled and nodded.
The command decided to install a new defense system on the station. Several additional turrets, an update to the guidance and targeting systems, replacement of outdated weapon models. As a result, you will be able to compete in combat power with a cruiser. Are you sure this is reasonable? Sir, Babylon 5 is first and foremost a diplomatic station. Even the mere arrival of your ships could cause justified concerns and discontent among the delegations. And as for the station's armament, the situation in the galaxy is changing, Captain, and Babylon 5 must change with it. The Narn-Centauri war is not happening here. The man stood up from the table, gesturing around the room, but no one can guarantee that it will always be like this. Earth cannot afford to ignore what is happening. Besides, the general grimaced. If something goes terribly wrong on Matok, my people and I will need a strong rear.
Captain, the men sighed, approaching the still dissatisfied Sheridan. I will be the first to be glad that this weapon will not be needed. But if I am wrong, it is better to have it than the other way around, right? I ask that you grant my engineers access to your defense nodes. I would like them to begin work as soon as possible. Commander Ivanova, this is your area of responsibility. And we, Captain, will meet here at 11 to work out a plan of attack. Is that clear? Yes, sir, General. The officers answered in a discordant chorus. And remember, no one except those present in this room should know about this conversation. I see. John nodded seriously, exchanging glances with his colleagues. Excellent. Then, for now you are free. Well, there's a phrase. What was it? Ah, a fire in a brothel during a flood. And that phrase perfectly described the bacchanalia that was happening on Babylon 5. Honestly, tried to focus on developing new platforms for Corona and Yuki. Well, as much as focus was needed for a high-tech distributed computing system at the level of a replicator network and me as its administrator. In any case, I was enthusiastically drawing new body options, taking into account the use of neutronium nanites when the ships of the Earth's armed forces arrived at the station, the Dreadnought and 5 transport landing bots. Looks like someone's having a party. Even from the surveillance cameras, I could clearly see how fun Mr. Garibaldi was having just thinking about what the legion of unbalanced baboons, popularly called Space Marines, or Marines in the old-fashioned way,
would do to the facility he was responsible for security. And they had only just begun to land on Babylon, and what would happen when this sweet contingent got to the pubs and recreation areas. Ambassador Delaine clearly completely out of her mind in some places.
Even in the company of Garibaldi. Going for a walk around the Zocalo district when the soldiers there had already begun to relax, they still had to come up with something more unsafe, in my opinion. Although their conversation was definitely worth listening to. There are too many Earth soldiers here today, Delaine sighed gloomily, looking around. These troops are being transferred to Io. Garibaldi, as always, was focused, especially being next to the ambassador of a foreign state. Babylon 5 is the closest point, so the command decided to make our station a transit point. They will stay here for a couple of days and then fly away. That's good, the Minbari nodded. I wouldn't like to think of Babylon 5 turning into a military station. Things in the galaxy are not in the best shape as it is. Everyone needs some place that can be considered a peaceful corner. If only it would help, Garibaldi chuckled.
Considering the relationship, the man emphasized the word with his quotation marks. Between the Narns and the Centauri, I'd say the peace talks were ruined before they even started. Londo and G'Kar are as stubborn as children. They don't even want to talk to each other, as if they really need this war. Hundreds of years of enmity are hundreds of years of enmity, Ambassador. Michael spread his hands. We are all slaves to our history, the Minbari nodded. To achieve a bright future, we must learn to break these chains. The Narns and Centauri would rather just break each other's necks. I'm afraid you're right, but still we must keep trying, Mr. Garibaldi. But the next moment, something happened that I had been expecting since the military had arrived at the station.
Garibaldi was forced to interrupt the Minbari ambassador, and having apologized, temporarily leave Delaine alone by the wall, running to break up a fight between two Marines who seemed to be fighting over a pretty waitress, who was not very enthusiastic about the idea of meeting either of them. As always, by the way. Delaine shook her head, and decided to leave this place to be on the safe side, but she didn't have time. The woman only took a couple of steps towards the exit to the corridor, when three not very sober soldiers came out to meet her, looking with extreme displeasure at the representative of the alien species in front of them. Do you need anything? The Minbari asked coldly. What are you? The tall bald-headed Marine asked sullenly, casting a look of disgust at the ambassador. I am a representative of the people of Minbar. Now let me pass. Minbari? The man looked back at his companions, smiling sarcastically. But the Minbari don't have hair. Everyone knows that. But you, the paratrooper demonstratively ran the woman's locks through his fingers. This is clearly Earth hair. Leave me alone. Let me through. Please. I didn't do anything to you. Delaine was clearly losing her composure, thrown off track by the unexpected aggression, and frightened by the potential development of the situation. Your guys beat us on the Bonnie line, and now you're hanging around here, the bald-headed guy spat. Trying to look like people, I think you need to be taught a good lesson. I was already starting to think about intervening. Fortunately, just a couple of meters from the rowdy company, there was an inconspicuous alley where I could quickly teleport. But then something completely unexpected happened. Have you ever seen what heroic battles with the main character look like in 20th century action movies? Well, those that are incredibly pathetic, but completely absurd from the point of view of common sense and the laws of physiology. And I used to think that this doesn't happen in life. Yeah. From around the corner, from where these great warriors had come, Yuki and Korone came out, slowly talking. The girls made surprised faces, which gradually turned into indignant ones, and then... I suppose the whole bar was very surprised, watching three healthy and not the weakest Marines fly across the entire hall to the opposite wall, thrown there by two gentle, I would even say fragile Neko girls, who then stood on either side of the Minbari ambassador, squinting appraisingly at the instantly silent contingent of the establishment, with a silent question, who's next? Are you unharmed, Madam Ambassador? Korone turned to Delaine, keeping her expression stern. Ah, yes. No. The Minbari shook her head, looking at the neck in shock. Everything is fine. You are Korone and Yuki, Lord Bao's assistants, aren't you? I'm an attaché, Korone nodded, and Yuki is the second Archon. It's not so easy to explain the meaning of this term. But yes, I guess you can consider us the ambassador's assistants. But what just happened? A fight in a bar, Neka shrugged. Lord Baal will scold us, sister. Yuki pressed her ear slightly to her head. Don't talk nonsense, the girl snorted. We'll tell the truth, it was self-defense and protection of the Minbari ambassador. The place was almost silent, broken only by the soldiers groaning slightly as they tried to get up off the floor and out from under the broken furniture.
Mr. Garibaldi, his eyes wide with shock, ran up to the participants of the events, looking from Delin to the neck and back again. Ambassador. Everything is fine, Mr. Garibaldi, the Minbari smiled reassuringly. Ah yes, I think you should still leave this place.
I'm not sure that events like what just happened won't happen again. We're seeing the ambassador off. Yuki smiled sweetly at the man. I think you have enough to worry about right now. I would be extremely grateful to you, the man exhaled. What the hell is going on here? Came the loud cry of the unit's sergeant, causing Garibaldi to wince. Having smiled sympathetically at the head of security, Delen and the Nex in English went into the very corridor where the Minbari was heading before the fight began, and I could only smile contentedly, shaking my head in admiration and saving the recording from the surveillance cameras that captured the girl's heroic deeds. Interlude. What the hell is going on here? Who started the fucking fight? Staff Sergeant Plug jerked the Marines, still lying on the floor, to attention as best they could. After all, flying 6 meters in a straight line, even for a trained person, especially an unexpected flight, is not a pleasant experience.
Nobody, sir. A quiet female voice came from behind the sergeant. Private Darman? The man turned around. So, all this? He waved his hand at the destroyed bar and the crumpled soldiers. Happened by itself? Yes, sir, Senior Sergeant. The man looked at his man with a dark look. Plug had not witnessed the fight itself, but he knew his platoon very well, and he had a pretty good idea who could have been the instigator of any existing disorder that could occur, especially in a bar. But army traditions are traditions for a reason, and he couldn't punish for an offense for which there was no clear evidence. He had to, because 3 of his soldiers clearly showed signs of a fight, and that was a violation of order and a direct order. But, in that case, you 4? Yes, Private Darman. The commander chuckled in response to the girl's surprised face. This concerns you too, since you saw what happened here. You could have stopped it from happening.
And now all 4 of you, march behind me to the ship, the sergeant shouted sharply, causing the guilty ones to involuntarily flinch. Sergeant, wait a minute. Yes? The man turned to Garibaldi. I had the pleasure of seeing what happened here, Michael whispered. I understand correctly that, having punished your subordinates, you will simply be forced to indicate in the report all the circumstances of this case. Yes, sir, the sergeant nodded, turning to the Marines. I don't think that would be appropriate. Ambassador Delen, the representative of Minbar, was here and… What the hell? The commander rolled his eyes, already imagining what such a scandal could lead to. That's exactly it. But I suppose there won't be any far-reaching consequences. Still, only the bar suffered, and the pride of your guys. The hostess is used to the first case.
In the second, the sergeant nodded understandingly. I'll make them shove my pride up their asses. And Ambassador Dolan, I am sure, Garibaldi smiled slightly, will not pay special attention to what happened. A small inconvenience, nothing more. I understand you, Senior Sergeant Plug, having restored his face to an expression of appropriate displeasure, turned to his subordinates and Darman, who was tensely awaiting the continuation of the dressing down. So, my ill-mannered baboons, the boss asked me to hush this up. And although I really want to send you all to scrub the toilets on the ship, he is the boss here, and bosses need to be respected. So this time you restless asses are lucky. But if I see or even hear of you doing something like this again… Plug made a dramatic pause, taking a deep breath. Your own mothers will regret having given birth to your vile asses. You will only get out of your outfits to get into a new outfit. Is everything clear? Yes, Senior Sergeant, the offenders shouted in unison. Is everything clear to your sheep? The men turned to the other paratroopers in the bar. This concerns you to the same extent. There are plenty of toilets on the ship. There are enough for everyone. Yes, sir, came a discordant voice. Then, disperse. And you, Black turned his displeased gaze to the 3. Get yourselves in order. It's sickening to watch. The sergeant winced, nodded jerkily to Garibaldi and turning sharply on his heels, left the bar, leaving his subordinates to come to their senses and rest further. Michael sighed tiredly, shaking his head as he had expected. This was already the 5th case of a bar fight since the arrival of the brave soldiers. It was lucky that the ambassador was not hurt. Otherwise, the thought of a new war made him so uneasy that the first thing he wanted to do was to drop everything and ask to join the crew of some pioneer as a cook.
So as not to see the civilized part of the galaxy for 10 years. Or better yet, 20. Chief, the paratrooper called out to him. My name is Garibaldi. The head of security turned to the girl with a sigh. Michael. Oh, and my name is Dodger. I just wanted to thank you for what you did. Not that they didn't deserve a beating, but anyway, thank you. You're welcome, Garibaldi sighed. If only it didn't turn into a tradition. It's too much fun on Babylon sometimes anyway. I could imagine, the girl grinned. And may I ask, who was that Minbari? And those two girls? I wasn't dreaming, was I? Did they really have cat ears? Yes, Michael smiled. It was Korone and Yuki. Korone is an attaché to the ambassador of the Goa'uld Empire, Lord Baal. And Yuki, well, the man scratched the tip of his nose, thinking. She gave her position, or title, but no one has figured out what her duties are exactly. But apparently she is Korone's sister, and the Minbari, it was Delen. She's the ambassador.
Oh shit. Private Darman even stopped, realizing what her platoon had just avoided. An ambassador. And another ambassador's attaché. 3 high-ranking citizens of other countries. It seems like we just walked on incredibly thin ice.
That's putting it mildly.
Garibaldi chuckled. Wait, Lord Baal? It wasn't his ship that the Drazi attacked last year. That's him. Oh, fuck. The paratrooper exhaled, putting it mildly. How much can you? Michael was clearly going to continue the conversation, giving himself the opportunity to rest for at least a minute. But the communicator on his hand beeped, hinting that something had happened somewhere else. Again. Oh, if it's one of yours again. He looked gloomily at Darman, who shrugged her shoulders with an innocent look, raising the communicator to his mouth and accepting the call.
Yes, I'm already on my way. Where's the mess again? Chapter 40. Impotence is the second happiness. Who goes visiting in the morning? He acts wisely. And in the evening, a fool comes to visit. They ate everything there in the morning. A pipe from the 90s. So where have you been, may I ask? Murr? Trying hard to pretend that he was a simple cat, Behemoth walked along the sofa, rubbing against my hand. Meanwhile, the tailed telepath was absent from the station for almost 2 weeks. Moreover, he did it so gracefully and skillfully that I learned about the fact of his escape after the fact when this infection returned. And just imagine, he even managed to hide his actions from the replicator network quite skillfully, simply running false data through his implant, indicating his supposedly everyday activities. And at that time, don't change the subject. I shake my head. I checked the surveillance cameras and the information from the network. You were gone for 2 weeks. And all this time you tried hard to pretend that you were actually here. Why? Murr. What do you mean you flew to visit? This two-tailed rascal. There are simply no words. From the replicator network I received from Behemoth a scattering of simply saturated with pride for his actions, frames, telling about his fascinating journey from the station to Earth and back. And from the sign Psychor headquarters, flashing on one of the images for the second time in my replicator life, I felt my eye twitch. He created it to his own detriment, both the 2 sisters and the tailed telepath terrorist. Well, at least they brought some conditional benefit. They saved Ambassador Delenn from the assault of drunken soldiers who had developed deep species feelings for the half-breed Minbari and human woman. But Behemoth, you were, of course, created as a cat that walks by itself. And you have excellent genes that allow you to fully implement this approach. But let's agree, I look with some displeasure into the honest, innocent cat's eyes. No more amateur activities without my consent. You still have to arrange an interstellar war for me to be completely happy. Misra, the emotion of a heavy, melancholy sigh, came from the cat through the replicator network. I won't do it again, probably. But I enjoyed the flight. You should go on an excursion too, Master. The only thing left to do was to do what hundreds and thousands of my predecessors had done, meaning that cat owners would roll their eyes and sigh heavily, hoping that the jeering prank would not have far-reaching consequences. The information package transmitted by Behemoth confirmed with a fair degree of probability that there would be no consequences, but this did not cancel out the general feeling from his prank. Lord Baal, this is Ambassador Delenn. If you will excuse me. The Minbari rang at the door of my cabin, shifting from foot to foot in the corridor, with a slight uncertainty on her face. Of course, Madam Ambassador. I stand up to greet the guest, giving the command to open the door. Please come in, make yourself comfortable. To what do I owe your visit?
Delenn bowed politely, almost ceremonially, as she entered the cabin and stopped with great surprise and interest, took a couple of steps and began to examine Behemoth, lounging leisurely on the sofa. "Ah, what kind of creature is this, Lord Baal?" "It's a Gyrinx," I answered the woman with a smile. "I've never met anyone like that, although, wait," Delenn thought, tilting her head to the side.
I suppose you might have come across something similar if you studied information about the fauna of the Earth. There are animals, cats, on this planet that are very similar, although, I shrug, this is just an external similarity. Perhaps, somewhere far in the past, by some incredible whim of the universe, these two species have a common ancestor. But I find it hard to believe in such an outcome. After all, the Gyrinxes live in another galaxy. I understand, the woman nodded, still continuing to look at the cat, who responded in kind. For a second, the Minbari frowned, as if she sensed something unusual. But then, the ambassador's face smoothed out. She smiled and finally walked closer to the chair, after my welcoming gesture, sitting down in the comfortable piece of furniture. "And did you know, Master," came from Behemoth, "that she is a telepath? Only a very weak one, practically not developing her abilities. Curious."
Moreover, continued Gyrinx, all Minbari without exception possess a telepathic gift, sufficient to be called a telepath. This will not allow her to read minds, but in the usual case she will be able to determine that a telepath is nearby and trying to read her. It was indeed curious, although I had suspected something similar myself. In a normal situation, without any telepathic gift at all, it was practically impossible to understand that someone was reading you. At least, I didn't know of any such cases. Delenn, however, understood perfectly well that Alice had gotten into her head in that old story with the missing corpse of their military leader. Moreover, she managed to block the telepath and push her out of her consciousness. Theoretically, based on the fragmentary understanding of the replicators of the mechanism of telepathic abilities. Knowledge, of course. This was possible using sheer willpower and self-control of consciousness.
But let's be honest, what is easier to believe? That Delenn is a unique individual with willpower and self-control better than the shallowing monks from the jokes, or that she is still a telepath, only a weak one and does not have any active ways of using this mutation? That's what I'm talking about. An orange rope and rosary beads won't suit her.
Perhaps I can offer you some tea? I nod towards the kitchen corner.
Thank you, Lord Ba.
The woman shook her head.
But I won't be staying long. In that case, I'm all ears, Madame Ambassador.
I sit down opposite the guest on the sofa next to Behemoth.
Actually, I would like to discuss two topics. Both are important to me.
The Minbari hesitated for a moment.
I would like to once again sincerely thank your assistants, Korone and Yuki, for saving my life. The girls are not here now. I thoughtfully stroke my beard, but I will definitely convey your words to them, Ambassador. I wonder why her phrase sounds like a farewell. To satisfy my curiosity, I even launched a full and detailed scan of the Minbari's body with the sensors placed in the cabin. Yes, at the same time I received data on another hybrid collected by the Triluminary, but no. Ambassador Delenn was completely healthy, which, if you think about it, was even surprising given the degree of anti-scientific process to which the ancient device subjected her. Thank you, Lord Baal. The thing is, I received a message from my government. I am being recalled from the station for a while and I cannot be sure that I will return here again. I would like to clarify something for myself. It would help me better understand what is happening around me. I'm listening, I nod. At the last meeting of the Babylon 5 Advisory Council, you had a conversation with Ambassador Kosh. The Minbari's face became focused. It seemed that now she had come to the main and real purpose of her visit. I don't think anyone in that room even understood what you were talking about. But you would like to know, I interrupt the woman, thoughtfully stroking my beard with my fingers, whether there was any basis for my words. Yes, the woman nodded with concentration. And I thought about it. The Minbari were definitely on the Vorlon's side in the current round of the conflict. But as far as I could remember the events to come, not all of them, as well as not all of Kosh's people, were sincere in their belief in the right cause. Delenn certainly should have been privy to the real state of affairs, especially since the woman herself went to Kosh, before her transformation, to get parting words
in the form of an answer to her question about Zadum.
Gintikątko padzionkaz, wykontanece nielowiz, przydony skorbion do jest łabiesze replikatro ważenia Grey Council, bo wty dazy zjawa i sta podwiżamy informacjono bylo stamie nożne azaugo. Da on sproje może każ zakordzionka usze jeza, co nie może nimi włe, sztony i wy może nimi właszu bułazę, nalano wierszo, somy ona żenaza. W informację glaszeno za groku wyma prawdzie i za karza do się mista z naszym inoszoła, deleniści, że jeknoże sześć moja. Z prawolem my zaibiania, nie da się kastadzincia, ambasador, kosz my plawale, my zajbuta mu. Zamożył jeszcze załurszy buławy, żelazką filany zawułobeny, o tu jest na żenaza, wygajenia na gerongła, one nama soma, lokimów szermi, one nama soma, ja moszte, one nama soma. Nazynaza nie potumino zoni, dana moi żniemy w szermi, i za nany wędzo się, że nie dzitejo, zawuła partem damina jątsi, szerzeni i my chodzi nimi osach, i samy jesz przedała niej, ansujeło, na nama, pera. Jest to, što minu zamysł to magałanie, i unoży mu minąłe, o ja zbydzie dziećmy noża, jest tam jętrawem mygojania. But
You are not going to interfere? As long as it doesn't affect me or the intelligent ones dear to me, Ambassador. I nod, carefully watching the woman's facial expressions. It's not a sin to ask for help, Ambassador, and I think you understand and accept this perfectly. But helping and solving all the problems for others are two different things. And if the first really helps. I lean toward the Mingbari, looking her straight in the eyes. Then the second completely devalues any development, and life without development becomes simply meaningless. I can't say that I can fully accept your point of view, but I certainly understand it, Lord Baal, the land sighed. Thank you for your frank answer. Perhaps this will help me understand the events that are happening a little better, and prepare for them. You're always welcome, Ambassador, I nod.
Sorry if I took up your time. The woman stood up from her chair, casting a still interested and extremely thoughtful glance at Behemoth, who responded in kind. No need, I smile, also rising to my feet. For me, it was absolutely no effort. The Minbari bowed briefly and turned on her heel, heading for the cabin exit, leaving me somewhat thoughtful. First Kosh, now Ambassador Delen. What next? Will the Shadows sign up for an audience? Or will Lorien knock on the door right now? It's funny, but I spent 4 whole seconds suspiciously staring at the door to the corridor that closed behind the Minbari. But no, it still remained closed, fortunately. Interlude. Somewhere on the internet, one of the thematic chats by interests, again. Guy with a pyramid has entered the chat. Guy with a pyramid shares a file. Guy with a pyramid. Just look at this. All you had to do was turn away for 5 minutes. Nekolover999. What? What the hell? Anime Forever. These are the same girls? Otaku. Well, actually, they are similar. Otaku. The same girls. To hell with the little things. Watch the video. This is... Maximus. This is further confirmation that cat girls exist. Anime Forever. And each of them can easily scatter a company of Marines. Sadly, yeah. I don't believe it. No, these are not proper cat girls. Neko Lover, 999. Yes, they should be cute and defenseless. Yamamoto. And they are nice. And express all your complaints to them yourself, personally and to their face. Anime Forever. I don't know about you, but I went to the bank. Maximus. Why? Anime Forever. Take out a loan. Because now I want to go to Babylon 5 even more than before. Maximus. You're sick. Anime Forever. Yeah. Maximus. To hell with it. I'm going to the boss to demand a vacation. Or a business trip. Yes. Anime Forever. Yeah. Are you crazy? Will you take it with you? Yeah.
2-3 wrogiciania Sheridan. Sheridan vazina zmale i utkawiu diśmi. Ja to wna terminala nie sztokie, monitorze uronca wąsojana z systemia ja z obserwacje po stonie z brancja. Bo posznia frant, debuwi mi. A górzmie zana alawał się brzyczcie wujan. Ja sobowy naszci asinów komendera na dołu, pneumatiką stacjona, jeśta rusznia borse, zapową mogre malu iut Agamemnon, bo pieros, no czle, na czle, surprise z Babilon, które się jak drogę stkarno się dzieście beraz, z Rosja drugi za i zadu nieworo zabą, zerżena zara za sakianys, tuda chternowo problemu za spobliana za rastrojega ja broże nożem jej żenen spo problemas, bo te monotonie wujen rutyny a mosze bwyścinie. Kapten, komandera zawanowa soma uron fonowe i żebie mecha ima ozwieno nowuje na sektura i ut ten. Wie fenomena exactly.
The men immediately became interested. Nothing special, the woman shrugged. Bright light, gravitational distortions, except, Ivanova checked the terminal screen, the disappearance of one transport ship from the radar. Pirates? The captain suggested, quickly typing a sequence of commands into the keyboard with his fingers and quickly running his eyes over the text on the screen. Anything is possible, although, of course, your Calvados should have dispersed these vultures for tens of parsecs around the station. Perhaps it's just a coincidence. No, perhaps the pirates really have nothing to do with it. In any case, we must check the sector in our jurisdiction. Is Zeta Link free? The squadron commander is on sick leave. Ivanova shook her head. And they are scheduled to rest after the last flight, but I think his deputy— No. Sheridan interrupted Ivanova, smiling contentedly at something. Let them rest. An exhausted fighter pilot is a bad pilot.
I'll fly myself. You? But you said it yourself. The captain stood up from the terminal, still smiling at his deputy, that there's nothing special there. And at least this way I'll have some fun. Commander, Sheridan sighed. Sitting on the Babylon, I feel like I'm getting dumber. I haven't flown the ship myself since I was assigned here. I'll lose all my skills. Okay, although the woman didn't lack the commander's stubbornness, she couldn't help but admit that she understood him perfectly in some ways. But you can't fly alone. We'll have to raise a flight anyway. Why not? The man narrowed his eyes slyly. I'm sure Edward Prendick will not refuse to receive his captain on board. Are you going to take Calvados? Commander Ivanova blinked in surprise. That's it. The damage control has been completed. John nodded towards his terminal. I checked. If there are pirates up to no good, the frigate can easily deal with it, and will finish what Lieutenant Prendick started. If there's something—
The captain moved his fingers, choosing his words.
extraordinary, I'd prefer to be on a bigger ship, rather than hanging around there in a single fighter shell. I can't say that I'm delighted with your decision, but I also can't help but acknowledge your arguments.
That's how we live, Commander. Sheridan chuckled. While I'm gone, you're in charge. As always, Susan shrugged. The captain nodded to the commander and quickly walked towards the exit from the bridge. Although the departure was not particularly urgent or important, he still wanted to prepare for it as soon as possible, at least to shake off the gloom and daily routine of the station commander, Lieutenant Prendick. John called over the station's network to the first mate, Captain Sheridan speaking. I'm listening, Captain. Edward answered immediately.
As the repairs and replenishment of the Calvados completed? The repairs are complete. Supplies and ammunition will be ready within an hour and a half, the lieutenant reported. Excellent. Make sure the crew is ready to take off when that happens. Do we have work to do, Captain? Sheridan smiled, noting the same thirst for activity in the young officer's voice that he himself had. We've got work to do, Lieutenant, John chuckled. I'll be at the Calvados dock in 2 hours. We'll discuss the details, and then we'll be off. I understand you. The ship will be ready. Having finished the communication session with a satisfied look, the captain headed towards the elevator. He had 2 hours to calmly drink a cup of coffee, eat something, and prepare for the flight. Fortunately, in contrast to the first acquaintance with the new ship, now the Calvados was already a much more pleasant sight for the military personnel. Although in the end, the answer of the fleet command was reduced to the simple position, your ship, you are responsible for it.
Sheridan still managed to knock out the replenishment of the frigate's crew to the minimum required set, which, although it differed from the full staff, at least did not represent those pitiful 50 people, according to peacetime standards, which he was given at the very beginning. Now he at least felt more at ease when he imagined a long autonomous flight, and any exit of a military ship could a priori be paranoidly considered a flight with an unpredictable duration, and the need to draw up a shift schedule for technicians and watches on the bridge. And the fact that Dr. Franklin's father, General Franklin, who had arrived in addition to the Babylon's defense systems, had generously shared ammunition for the frigate's charge guns, made the captain incredibly happy.
Nata ni brotamne sabspanjan traga riena vousha. Sypajzie się i staraka urucku weniot naral spadzie ciści wciarka knabata. Nadrajcza Edward Prendik to bejc naramania vousza. Jęcu wierąctek tramsiane nad badecznie loukrami. Szabazjadowida gradana wiewsze zda bądzie mowięcine do glarow czobińcali mniej. Ale tkintraroszoba do niewicna dybo. Więc na goran łoksariadzie wiezma, stam jeści ściarka knabata nie uprzykrozej, bo w jego się spodzie zagrabnago sogowa. Kami opowconia, niędłat frygata na mikazi wnician zegowa gręk. Najwana morzą czkiek to podwanieściś takiego ronawiardów, zawisąbien dagora na usowie endagore arbowa ograne. Nuzałki niścia giśmińca nabija gowa na ślilanepa. So, lieutenant. Sheridan barant to manie prendik to nie istubowo więcke gbonia. Jaga w danie rosznyk cie dajone rucharka, on manie test klirine ciemiek to bodonie ściściej woda na mozaniech. No to ilusi lawakam, jak tu bobiendu stata ciech, arbowon niszawa żydia zbadany w nogowa, a jak tu daje i stajony. John, no wierzchniak nabadać. Yes, sir. Excellent. Jaga gadane jak bosocheni. Oże jest tapoje. Sheridan poprzowny i krystal na ibłoni i ekrana jacket po rabeju grince i tosta sfierę rod gibel. Aż sektor nasie nali, fenomena jej reki adharanie łabarcze znabiera grodziełe. Glow gravitanine distortions.
John waved it off. It's all poetry. According to the latest reports, a transport ship has disappeared there. The captain ran his fingers across the keyboard, bringing up a summary and data on the missing vessel. A classic Tescan, hundreds of which were used by the Earth Commonwealth in everything from hauling fertilizer or grain to flying passengers between nearby systems. In this particular case, the missing ship was carrying 36 civilians flying from one of the colonies and 300 tons of spare parts and consumables for drilling equipment. The transport had transmitted a distress signal from the designated sector, and its beacon had gone completely silent, as if the ship had never existed.
You think they're pirates, sir?
Prendik frowned, running his eyes over the lines of the report. It's unlikely. You still tried your best. John shook his head. But it's better to be safe than sorry, as my grandfather used to say.
Agreed,
nodded the first mate.
Calvados is fueled and fully stocked with ammunition and provisions.
Excellent.
In case of unforeseen developments, 2 squadrons of Babylon 5 fighters will be on standby. But I think this is just a precaution. Again, Prendik nodded. Better safe than sorry. Exactly. There was silence in the cabin for a while. Edward Prendik carefully studied the data provided by Sheridan, and the captain simply sat patiently in his chair, once again looking around the furnishings of his cabin and waiting for his first mate to familiarize himself with the information and get an idea of the flight. Finally, the lieutenant nodded in satisfaction, finishing his reading and sitting up straight in his chair. Pulling the sector observation crystal out of the terminal, Sheridan put it back in his pocket and rose from his desk. Prendik rose next. The captain ushered his assistant forward, and the officers headed out of the cabin and onto the frigate's command bridge.
On the bridge of the prototype frigate, as it seemed to Sheridan, who had conscientiously proven his right to be called a full-fledged frigate during the mission to clear the sectors surrounding the station of pirate gangs, a calm working atmosphere reigned. As soon as the ship's commander appeared at the door, the duty officer immediately notified everyone with the standard phrase, "The captain is on the bridge." But Sheridan only nodded, giving the signal to continue working, and calmly sat down in the captain's chair, looking around at the crew members who had returned to their work in a businesslike, unhurried manner. Even though the damage the ship had sustained in the encounter with that unknown alien vessel had been superficial, the Babylon's technicians had performed a full maintenance and repair operation, eliminating all the detected faults and anomalies in the frigate's systems. And now the Cavadas crew itself was conducting its final pre-flight checks, making sure that all the required protocols and command sequences were being followed as they were supposed to be. When Sheridan was captain of the Agamemnon, he had preferred to simply sit silently in his place at such moments, not distracting
or interfering with the people doing their job. He was doing exactly the same now. "The ship is ready for takeoff," the first officer reported, checking the information on the terminal. "May I, Captain?" Prendick turned questioningly to Sheridan, then looked toward the pilot's seat. "Of course, First Officer." The man nodded, contacting the station's bridge. "Go ahead." "Babylon 5. This is Earth Commonwealth Frigate Calvados. We are ready to cast off, requesting permission to depart." "We understand, Calvados," Ivanova's voice answered him. "Departure is cleared."
If you require a transition zone, the schedule will have a window in 10 minutes and 22 seconds. Understood. Thank you, Commander. The captain smiled. But we'll jump ourselves. There's no need for a transition zone. Got it. Good luck, Captain. Thank you. Sheridan disconnected the connection, nodding questioningly to Prendick, who had already busily taken the first pilot's seat and adjusted the controls to his personal notions of comfort. "We can fly, Lieutenant." "Understood, Captain." Edward smiled happily and turned forward to the bridge observation window. His fingers confidently entered the necessary commands, temporarily handing over control of the ship to the station's automatic docking system, which immediately began to move the frigate out of the parking space.
Sheridan chuckled knowingly. Although Prendick was his first assistant, de jure and de facto, the ship's commander most of the time. While the captain was busy with his duties on Babylon 5, his heart was clearly more in piloting. It was even surprising how he ended up in this position, and why he didn't go into fighter piloting instead. However, John mentally shrugged his shoulders. Perhaps it was all connected with the fact that the Calvados was still a prototype, and in such conditions, it was not uncommon to try to duplicate the duties of crew members in order to maintain maximum survivability and efficiency of the ship in any conditions. In any case, if anyone would be against such a state of affairs, it certainly wouldn't be Sheridan. The Calvados slowly left the Babylon dock. Having moved away from the station for some distance, the frigate turned away, moving away from the planet and the transition zone and entering a more open area of space. Prendick turned questioningly to the captain, and having received an affirmative nod, confidently pressed several buttons on the armrests of the pilot's chair. For a moment, Sheridan thought that he felt with his whole body a change in the operating mode of the ship's power plant, which usually represented a familiar and imperceptible light vibration transmitted along all the bulkheads. And the next moment, in space in front of the Calvados, a spark of energy brightly flared, unfolding into a funnel of transition to hyperspace. Talon peered at the sensor data with intensity. A Narn fighter was no substitute for a full-fledged ship, but even so, a Frazee-class ship was autonomous and survivable enough to conduct solo patrols. But who would have thought that what seemed like a routine sortie would turn into a game of survival? The sector the Narn were supposed to be checking had already seen suspicious signals before. It was far enough away from any Narn colonies or facilities, and was under the jurisdiction of the Earth Commonwealth as it was adjacent to Babylon 5, but it was also the space through which several transport routes passed, and the Narn regime had a vested interest in their safety. The sudden impact shook the heavy fighter's hull, causing Talon to whip his head around in an attempt to see the enemy, even if it was invisible on radar. The unknown alien ship, large enough to rival the heavy cruiser in size, was irregularly streamlined and clearly had a large reserve of maneuverability. At least for now, it had managed to successfully avoid the Narn fighter's line of sight, staying out of the pilot's line of sight. A series of blue pulses, clearly from some form of energy pulse weapon, struck Talon's ship. The fighter shook once more, and multiple malfunction signals flickered alarmingly on the displays.
Narn cursed quietly, trying at least with his piloting skill to turn the ship, which was still under control, to point its nose at the enemy and fire a salvo. The ship shook once more, and the pilot dropped his hands in resignation. A successful hit had completely knocked out its controls and weapons systems. The enemy had definitely encountered the Narn ships before and knew where to hit. But why? They hadn't destroyed him. Talon frowned tensely. His fighter had been deliberately disabled, but not blown up with the first salvo, although G'Kar could see they had every opportunity to do so. They wanted to take him prisoner? A blue stream of light shot out from somewhere in the bowels of the ship, confirming the Narn's assumption. A tractor beam. The damaged fighter, which had somehow miraculously not fallen apart, jerked one last time and was smoothly pulled toward the source of attraction, causing Talon to grin angrily.
Just show yourself within his reach and he'll show you what a noun in a rage is. Unknown. Non-fighter, this is Calvados. The unknown man's voice broke through the wild interference of the damaged communication device. We, help. And the next moment, right in front of the unknown ship, a hyperspace transition funnel opened up from which Talon had never seen such ships before. It was noticeably smaller than the enemy and in some ways vaguely reminded the Narn of their own heavy cruisers. There was something similar in the sleek lines of the hull, covered with anthracite black armor plates that practically did not reflect the light of the stars, which made it seem like it was just a patch of darkness that was attacking. The alien ship immediately turned off its tractor beam, briefly throwing the fighter away into space, and turned to face the new enemy.
Only Jukon knows what the captain of this ship was thinking, but the unknown decided to try to attack the new target in the same way as they did with the Narn fighter. A series of blue pulses hit the Earth ship, knocking whole sheaves of sparks out of the armor plates. But it certainly didn't do the damage the shooters had expected. The Calvados seemed to freeze in uncertainty for just a moment, but the next moment, with surprising agility, it turned its nose towards the enemy and fired back. Talon only chuckled, watching with satisfied surprise as two dense ruby-red beams struck the enemy's hull, piercing the plating and burning huge holes along the ship. The battle ended as quickly as it had begun. The Calvados fired another salvo of its forward beam cannons, piercing the enemy ship through and through in the stern area, and as the Narn believed, knocking out its propulsion system.
In response, the Earth ship received a more powerful and concentrated salvo somewhere in the middle of the hull, where additional weapon points could be guessed, which clearly caused some damage, at least as far as Talon could see from his position, but the captain of the Calvados got tired of the games. A swarm of glowing dots separated from the black ship, in which the Narn recognized the missile salvo, and then two ruby beams struck again. The man even had to cover his eyes with his hands. The flash of the explosion was so bright, not smoothed out by the fighter's currently inoperative automatics. Later, after blinking, he managed to somehow reconstruct in his head the picture of what had happened. The salvo of missiles hit the holes in the hull punched by the beam weapon, and the enemy ship was clearly not prepared for such damage. The explosion inside the hull literally tore off the rear of the enemy ship, scattering debris across the surrounding space.
Perhaps most of the crew was still alive, but the ship was no longer an enemy. The Narn was 100% sure of that.
Unknown Narn heavy fighter.
The voice came from the speakers of Taloka's ship again.
Are you still alive there?
The Narn reached the control panel with difficulty, hoping that the transmitter was still functional enough to respond.
Yes, the ship is very badly damaged, but is holding up for now. Great. Wait a few minutes. We'll pick you up.
Thank you. When he set out to check, Sheridan had no idea that the truth about the events in Sector 92 would be so ambiguous. Although if someone had asked the captain, he would have expressed it somewhat differently. Another, damn it, alien species that had entered space and considered itself entitled to simply attack the first ships it encountered.
And if in the case of the Narn fighter John could still have some questions or doubts,
He still had not seen the beginning of the drama and only managed to see its very end. Then the ship's salvo at the Calvados, which had fired the very next second, as soon as the frigate left degenerate space, that was why the captain gave the order to return fire without any hesitation, perhaps softening it by giving instructions not to shoot to kill. Still, first of all, he needed to understand what was going on here and who his new acquaintances were. For the first time in the past year, Sheridan felt alive again, as if he had returned to the Agamemnon. And he felt even more alive and satisfied, having seen with his own eyes what his new ship was capable of. The capabilities of the frigate, especially taking into account its official class and dimensions, were impressive to the depths of his soul.
Sheridan even thought that if Earth had 100 such ships during the war with Minbar, some events might have gone a little differently.
Unknown heavy non-fighter. Having made sure that the damaged enemy ship no longer posed a threat, the captain pressed several buttons on the armrest of the chair, again contacting the unfortunate fighter, the deplorable state of which could be seen even without scanning, purely visually. "Are you still alive there?" The nun's voice was hoarse, tired, and the transmission was almost blocked by interference, but he was definitely still alive. "Yes, the ship was very badly damaged, but it was still holding up." "Great. Wait a few minutes, we'll pick you up." "Thank you. Send a couple of drones to the fighter." The captain turned to one of the dispatchers on the bridge, who, as he remembered from the documentation, was responsible for small unmanned devices. "Let them carefully deliver it to us on board."
If we can detach the cockpit separately, just drag it. The last thing we need is for something to explode in our back pocket.
"I understand you, Captain." The young woman nodded, turning to the control panel and starting to work her magic on the controls. "What's wrong with the enemy ship?" The man turned in the other direction.
The life support system is working as far as I can see, but our attack cut off their energy lines from the main reactor. It's a miracle they didn't blow it up. How much longer will they last? If they don't do something unexpected, 3 hours, maybe 4. Great. They'll wait. If there are any changes, let me know right away. Yes, sir. The next moment, a spark of energy flared behind the alien ship, signaling the opening of a funnel. And 3 seconds later, the nostalgically recognizable Agamemnon slowly emerged from hyperspace. Agamemnon, sir? Edward Prendick turned to the captain in surprise.
It seems that someone on Babylon got bored.
And someone, the man grinned, has an overly reverent attitude towards the safety of their boss. Captain Sheridan, a voice came from the speakers. I see we're a little late, but General Haig asked us to stop by your sector on the way to make sure everything went smoothly. We managed on our own, the man smiled, looking at his former ship. But I'm still glad to see you. We need to get busy with the ship. Captain, there is a sudden surge of energy on the enemy ship, one of the crew members interrupted Sheridan. What? Damn it. A bright flash cut the ice, causing the people on the bridge to wince.
Katodavus vishsana ja glanami ja glasrovlušaskešė tu abora, katoh nievobie, kothujo dobsa to prześnicu trośniwe. Niesi zanos byko zredzlek parią bawkowie. Sapieszcie, ktoże im ośmiwa sezoną żywo dała, bo zistarata go fikatynie wagławana, distraka szejennej, tage istroch jak nie ratejo, od maula. Na przyi Agamemnoni powo kalwados, same owaniowy istrocho. I sobie zebryś odstiemy strowią mnie sanieko molużnie pojnakujeni. Sheridan wiene do dojazd dzieco wszemkrzej sporoprej. Tej zala brzecinomu slogu naślajną nam ozwaja. I nie przejmorze z objawu oszmije prafestów sztomie więdyti, polwarzenal Babilon piętaka zlazania w żynie. I jak trzygą jerenda nik, jak da zazana znów tkiendati. Rozbowo w ośmi. I problem imię mniżej dmarik, i dwożonala micz to więgali.
Interludy. The Grey Council.
The ruling body of the Minbari Federation, the composition and true goals and capabilities of which were not fully known even to the Minbari themselves. 9 representatives of their species, first elected by Valen himself, who established it. 3 from the warrior caste, 3 from the priest caste, and 3 from the worker caste. After the first convocation of the council, the composition changed more than once. Some retired, others died of disease or during wars, but the fundamental rule was always observed: balance above all. Delenn took a deep breath, straightening her back even more and trying to keep a confident, focused face, stepped down from the ramp of her ship. In keeping with a long-standing tradition dating back to the last Shadow War, the Grey Council never met in the same place twice, and the fact that the Minbari rulers used one of the many Sharling cruisers that roamed the vast expanses of space for their meetings and lodgings made following this tradition that much easier. The Minbari glanced around the Valenta's dock, shook her head, and walked at a measured pace toward the council chamber. A hall filled with impenetrable darkness, which made it seem limitless, and a circle of 9 spots of light, each with a silent figure in grey robes, with hoods pulled low over their faces, were already waiting for her. Delenn had been here more than once. As a simple novice accompanying Dukat, as his student and protégé, and as a full-fledged member of the Grey Council, helping to guide her people to a bright future. And now when she had become a hybrid of a Minbari and a human woman, when she had sacrificed everything for the sake of fulfilling her higher purpose, they wanted to get rid of her. A dull resentment, seasoned with notes of anger and misunderstanding, stirred in the woman's soul. For 20 cycles I have stood with you. The Minbari looked around the council, stepping into the center of the circle, the place reserved for the speaker, or the invited Minbari in her case. Many of you I have called friends, and now you have all rejected me? You know me. You know my devotion to our mission in the face of the great war to come. Delenn's voice was thick with pain and confusion. For the greater good, I have sacrificed everything. Everything I have, everything I am. Is this the time for petty disagreements? The woman spoke, turning from one council member to the next, trying to read the emotions on their hooded faces, to understand what motivated their former colleagues. We must be united, or we will be destroyed. Do not let my sacrifice be in vain. Let me finish what I started. For the future of our people, let me return to Babylon 5.
I will be happy, the voice of the advisor sounded behind Delen, a vaguely familiar voice of an unknown Minbari, apparently, who was her replacement. If you stay with the people, Delen. So it was you who took my place. The Minbari turned towards the voice. I don't know you. You know, Delen? The figure raised his hands, slowly throwing back the hood, and revealing to the woman's eyes a truly familiar face, the face of Shai Alif Nerun. Nerun? The woman raised her eyebrows in surprise. I don't understand. Delen turned sharply to the rest of the council. He's a warrior. What's going on here? What are you doing? When Valen first assembled the Grey Council, he called for 3 members from each caste. From each. And if you don't want me among you anymore, I must be replaced by a priest. A 4th warrior upsets the balance. Perhaps that is a good thing, Nerun answered with a grin. After all, it is we who always die defending Mimbar. We fought the war with the humans, and we will fight the new enemy when it appears. The council is isolated from the people. The council always thinks of the higher goals, of the purpose, while not true. The advice is not true, the Minbari grimaced. Warriors should not dictate the path of the people. And why not? When I was brought onto the council, I learned with great surprise. Nerun's face clearly showed anger and disgust. What the real reason for our shameful capitulation was. No one from the warrior caste knew that. And I assure you, Delen, I assure you, if we had been told the truth then, we would not have stopped. You don't understand, and now, the warrior interrupted the woman, I see only how Minbar and all our people are rolling into darkness. We humbly accepted the council's order then. We left the planet of people, although we were only a step away from complete victory. But that's not all, Delen. Not everything? The woman frowned. Not all, Nerun nodded. Minbar was attacked, just recently. They attacked the warrior caste, wiping out our entire colony on Shalekta. And what did the council do? Nothing. The Minbari almost spat these words out, looking with a wry grin at the councillors who continued to remain silent. We wiped ourselves off, as if that was how it was supposed to be. It was a tragic coincidence. We all read your report, Delen. Don't you think it's an unfunny joke? Or has your mind started to fail you after your transformation? The advisor gestured at the woman with his hand. If you called me here just to insult me, Delen's face turned into a frozen mask, and only in the depths of her eyes could one read the woman's true emotions. Longing and the sorrowful misunderstanding of what was happening. You're not even Minbari.
You're a disgrace to our race, and the belief that you're fulfilling some great purpose is ridiculous.
But even you can be useful. Minbar is no longer your home. Nerun waved his gloved hand in a denial gesture. So go ahead, build bridges, fly to your Babylon 5, and never come back. The council chamber fell silent. The 8 figures standing around the woman had not spoken a word during Nerun's accusatory and angry speech. Delen felt something inside her snap. The warrior caste's words had cut her to the core, but the indifference of everyone else, even the 2 priests who still held the Grey Council, had cut her even more. The 9 beams of light died out with a hollow sound, leaving the Minbari standing alone as if in a vast void, as if in a tiny piece of the universe that had now shrunk to a small spot of light beneath her feet. After taking a moment to collect her thoughts and calm down, Delen, allowing herself to slump for a moment, walked towards the exit of the Grey Council chamber. She didn't know if she would ever see this place again. For the first time, she didn't even know what the path she had chosen with all her selflessness would bring her. But she knew one thing for sure. She would follow the chosen path, just as she had done before. Even if Seitai Delen no longer existed because she was no longer one of the 9, but even just Ambassador Delen could be useful to the future. No one had promised her that it would be easy. It's hard to cut you in your place, Captain. General Haig? Sheridan jumped up from his chair in surprise as soon as he saw the senior officer enter, standing at attention. At ease, Captain, the man waved his hand. This is an unofficial visit. How was your departure?
I hope I didn't spoil the fun by sending the Agamemnon to keep you company.
No, sir. John smiled, inviting his guest to sit down as well. But I'm frankly a little surprised where my old ship even came from. I even wanted to climb aboard, for old time's sake, so to speak. But they flew away immediately after helping to collect the wreckage of that ship and escorted us to the station. They have other things to do. The general shook his head. I'm already grateful for the fact that they kindly gave me a ride to Babylon 5. Haig looked meaningfully at Sheridan, taking out a small device from his pocket, which the captain recognized with surprise as a military broadband jammer, usually used to temporarily disable listening equipment in a limited area of space. A jammer, sir? The captain perked up in surprise. You can never be 100% sure. But now we can be calmer, and we can talk. Finally! The captain's face immediately changed, rising to his feet. It's about time someone flew in to give me valuable instructions.
When I heard about your unofficial visit, damn it, Sheridan threw up his hands. I've been sitting here for 6 months, like in a swamp. I've lost the habit of superiors.
Forgive me, Captain, General Haig sighed. But after the death of President Santiago, there was a real mess on Earth. What did you manage to find out? After all, the president was the last to visit Babylon. There are no traitors here, sir. John shook his head with firm conviction. I don't like to spy on my subordinates, but what happened then was a shock to all of them, I'm sure. As for the rest, Sheridan thought for a moment. As far as I could tell, the only unusual thing was that the president met with one of the ambassadors, Lord Ball. Ambassador of the Goa'uld Empire, yes, I know, nodded the general. As far as we know, Santiago made this decision unexpectedly. It is unlikely that there were any long-term plans here, although there is always room for error. Well,
he's quite an ambiguous person. Intelligent, the captain corrected himself. One can never say with certainty what and for what purpose Lord Baal will do next. After all, we have the Calvados, built only thanks to his… whim? Your frigate. Yes, by the way, it's very good that it remained at your disposal. I managed to help ensure that your reports to the Fleet Command got into the right hands. Sir? Now John was really surprised. You're not a spy, Captain. You're more like… The man stood up from his chair, walked over to the kitchen corner, and poured some juice into one of the glasses. Cheese in a mousetrap. Santiago understood perfectly well that this station was important, very important, and having a warship at his disposal that only a few people knew about was worth a lot. The president knew that if something unexpected happened to him, his successor, Clark, would rather prefer to put in his place some soldier, thinking with the main caliber of the cruiser and not his head. Thank you for the flattering reference, General, Sheridan chuckled. You're not like that, of course. Haig held out his hands in a conciliatory tone, smiling back. But you could easily be mistaken for one. If Clark and his cabal consider you harmless, you and Babylon 5 will be left alone, or at least not monitored so closely. And what will this give? Those of us, Haig became serious, clearly getting to the point of the conversation, who can think, do not believe that Santiago's death was an accident. Yes, John responded tensely. Recently, having access to data about that day, I myself began to think that something is wrong. If Santiago was killed, we are dealing with more than just a murder. This is a coup d'etat. Yes and no.
There could have been an influential group with connections in completely different departments, intelligence, military, radical patriots, but they clearly weren't the ones calling the shots. Psy-Corps? Sheridan raised his eyebrows. Perhaps. Telepaths have long and qualitatively aroused suspicion, each time, however, remaining out of business. Only here. There is no evidence and we are forced to act with extreme caution. If we hurry, we will be discovered and the threat will be eliminated. And Babylon 5, John stroked his chin thoughtfully, has always been on the sidelines. But it's precisely because of our remoteness that we have the resources to conduct our own investigation? Exactly. And since you're a stupid soldier, they won't keep such a close eye on you. Sheridan thought about it. He hadn't lied to the general. The president's death did indeed look very suspicious, and this was noted by everyone who even tried to look a little further than the news and newspaper articles. But Haig's proposal itself, the reason he had come to the station, whatever he decided now, he would have to bear the decision he had made for the rest of his life. John understood perfectly well that his team, Ivanova, Garibaldi, Franklin, and many other employees at the station would most likely follow him with great desire, and this immediately made the stakes in the ongoing game unpleasantly high. Why me?
I can report you as soon as you step out into the corridor, General.
Hardly.
Haig shook his head. From a soldier's service record, you can understand a lot about what kind of person he is, if you read carefully, of course. And you have an important and serious shortcoming. You are a patriot of your state. The state, the man emphasized, and not a specific person in power.
It's a difficult choice, you bet.
In any case, we can't afford to remain inactive any longer. My flight to Earth leaves in half an hour. The general put down his glass of unfinished juice. I will try to pass on to you all the information I have gathered up to this point, all the smallest rumors, inconsistencies in the testimony. In short, everything I have. And if we want to restore the rule of law on Earth, your help would not hurt me. The face of the Babylon commander reflected the intense work of thought, an attempt to weigh all the pros and cons, until finally he made a decision. I am with you, General. I really hope that this will not be the last decision in my life and career, but I am with you. Haig nodded gravely, returning to his chair. There was not much time, and on the contrary, there was a great deal to discuss. And then Sheridan had a much more difficult and important conversation with his subordinates. And all that was left was to hope that he would not meet the end of this long day in a cell or in front of a firing squad. Lord Bale, looking very worried and extremely serious, Ambassador G'Kar stood at the threshold of my cabin. Ambassador? I bow my head slightly in greeting and led the Narn in. How can I help you? Help, the Narn sighed. I wish someone would help me and my people. Forgive me, Lord Bale. G'Kar shook himself, collecting his thoughts. Please forgive me for such an unceremonious visit without warning, but you are not disturbing. Please, Ambassador, come in. Some tea? Something stronger? No, the Narn shook his head. I still have a few meetings ahead of me and then another conversation with my government. I need a clear head. I understand. So, I offer the Narn a seat in the armchair, settling myself on the sofa opposite.
G'Kar sat on the very edge of the furniture, lost in thought and clearly thinking about something beyond this cabin.
Finally, about 20 seconds later, the man raised a gloomy gaze to me, sighed deeply and, having collected his thoughts, nevertheless began to speak. Lord Bal, as you know, as everyone knows, the Narn Regime is currently at war with the Centauri Republic. I will not justify my side or denounce the enemy. I soberly assess the situation and understand perfectly well that the roots of the current situation lie much deeper and further in the past than I would like, and it is no longer so easy to find the right and the guilty. I didn't interrupt, giving the ambassador a chance to speak out and bring the conversation to the point normally. And the point, as I suspected and the replicators agreed with me giving a 78.491% probability, would concern a request for help.
I was more than sure that you would come with exactly the same question, or had already gone, to Sheridan and, at a minimum, to Dallin.
But he would not get anything global useful from this. A few hours ago, the Narn continued, I received a report from the government. Footage from a service buoy on one of our colonies. G'Kar took a data crystal from his pocket, at least what it managed to record before it was destroyed by the Centauri. If you want, you can take a look. Having accepted the crystal from the ambassador, I inserted it into the terminal, starting the recording. Well, a small colony of Narns in a remote system on the very edge of their space. A common target for the first victims of war. Several tens of thousands of people on the planet. A border outpost in orbit with a couple of cruisers. That's all the presence. It couldn't even be called a military base, more like a cargo transfer point with protection from pirates.
And it was there that the Centauri flew, to heavy cruisers Vorchan with an air wing and escort. The camera on the buoy managed to film the entire battle being quite far from the main scene of action, but this only added to the tragedy of the picture. The cruisers, having emerged from hyperspace, immediately fired their main calibers, almost disabling the Narn ships that had just begun to turn in their direction. And then the melee began. The recording showed that the Narns resisted desperately, but luck and superiority were clearly not on their side, especially since, having barely realized that things smelled of kerosene, a signal was transmitted to the colony about the evacuation,
and the garrison ships were forced to worry more about covering the civilians leaving the system than about the actual battle. 5,000 Narns died in the battle, G'Kar commented after waiting for the image on the screen to fade.
They attacked without warning, although you yourself heard Ambassador Mollari's promise not to attack civilian targets.
The captain of the second cruiser could have left, he would have had time. But he was simply forced to stay and cover the departing transport with the planet's inhabitants with his ship. You saw, Lord Bal.
I saw. I nod thoughtfully.
If those two ships hadn't been there, the ambassador sighed, they would have easily destroyed the entire colony, with its entire population, women, children, old people. And, as if that weren't enough, Mollari said that his government hadn't broken its promises. He accused us of deliberately using civilians to cover military ships. That is,
G'Kar pointed his finger at the screen.
The cruiser didn't cover the transport with the inhabitants. He was hiding behind it from the Centauri fire. He used it as a human shield.
During any war, it is always difficult to find the truth.
Внимание не кристалля, та время присталя, же мы шоу войны прямого, та хочения не хорю. Его запасаю чутто. Омышей фичес какадем.
О ножении самовна в ушею магови хущи и брусева нашем размане мая в зубатях и паяху ашая хущи.
На мааробов, на угалекуя хажуцы, второе темноробие маэдрашай, вахасачевств военным маэдрашай тоуга. Потому настояй на росеме, потому нар на значении правете, это пипрощивание рубе. Потому на хушу, а нажением на востоят. Мне на мане мне парня, буком фон тарока, по потому всям балапое, в очи празмету утехица, удеха мазанием на всени, пойдеха мазанием на хуже, а нажение на востоять. Симны измоление, а нажение на востоять, а нажение в него нет, а нажение на востоять синнове. Терука, присталие шуорнята, как увонята нарного нарелной кристале, зуляти ришево том, бу само в 10 муне 300 кроветого 94 пересон, а нажение на востоят. Живый бужал на правот, каретом на саваре полуня сохах, таким мазалый слово миле. Черабута заняне уговя стархуши, егдую обоветим нарном нарил. Они обу мирей шо, а стан нашего тавитиму, он нарнуня прина транспорта но проистам. Они усащу яса они та правот, на столят майтив, и на ты ведены, это межевые на слободе, на номне хари маржем. Айх, по непоях ощу на саморазение. Как? Айх, я-то валь, мышо я стая-то решу.
Yes, you are right, the Narn nodded. And this is the most difficult part of the conversation. I have already spoken with Captain Sheridan, and after you, I will go to Ambassador Delenn. As painful as it is to talk about it, G'Kar hung his head. No matter what price I have to pay later, but I cannot watch what is happening to my people. I came to ask for help. Be careful with your words, Ambassador. I shake my head, looking seriously straight into G'Kar's eyes. Some payment may be worse than the original disaster. Can you help? G'Kar's arrival to me was not unexpected. Rather, it was surprising that he only now made a direct request for help. Apparently, both he and his government finally realized that someone was behind the Centauri, which meant that it would be almost impossible to win on their own. And the Narn's request led me to an important question. Should I interfere in what was happening? Ambassador G'Kar, as far as I understand sentient beings, and as far as I have come to know Captain Sheridan, Delenn, and the other ambassadors, no one will fight for you. In addition, they are limited in their powers and will be forced to turn to governments for instructions. You understand that, in fact, you are asking other states to enter your war. Yes, but I have no other choice. Otherwise, you saw, Lord Bal. I understand that you have convened the council? I did, the Narn nodded, but I don't think it will have any effect. Londo, as always, will be, in general, the ambassador sighed, spreading his hands. As always, the Goa'uld Empire will not fight on your side. I shake my head, having made my decision. But that doesn't mean we like what's happening. The civilian population on both sides should not be drawn into the conflict and serve as human shields or bargaining chips in battles. What are you suggesting?
A glimmer of hope appeared in the ambassador's eyes, although he still didn't fully understand what exactly I was talking about. But did I understand it myself? On the one hand, I really didn't see any reason to interfere in the conflict, especially since it meant a confrontation with the shadows, with almost 100% probability, and, albeit with a slightly lesser probability, with the Vorlons. Still, Kosh was quite straightforward, demanding my non-interference in their game. And the shadows were shadows, and it was not at all difficult to predict their reaction to my participation in the events. On the other hand, I complained about being bored, right? Well, here's some entertainment. I will make a full statement at the council, but I can already say that you will have fewer headaches with protecting the civilian population.
The Narn's eyes widened. He clearly still didn't understand what exactly I was going to do, but somewhere deep in his soul, the realization was still trying to reach him. Well, and for the first time he wasn't sent to hell by his interlocutor. A little later, he would definitely think about what my help would ultimately cost him. After all, G'Kar was no fool and he had been burned too often by trusting others. But that would come later. Now the Narn was too worried about the last battle. Interlude. And why did it seem to Ivanova more and more with each passing minute that the captain's assignment to meet the Lumati delegation arriving on Babylon 5 with a mission of first official contact and the potential for a mutually beneficial cooperation agreement smelled of something very, very unpleasant? It would seem that this is a normal job for the staff of a diplomatic station, right? And Babylon is definitely a diplomatic station, designed to receive diplomats, right?
Нас одна зменжа найнянцо зушалошилосе пруяновора, токе швовневе, топою овер осли посочками шмиклежиды. Niesi slorma bazgezie kaniotot na prozdawy z niewiemy kaj razegamy dla barsowo stoni graziry. Mozie na priterą zaś zdała z nieproskrustęgo przez oszma żelani. Zbielała z alberską fumaj pracone te glaksow kormiasta prejść w to wiełe dla nodiesiana. Marzenie na ślastą i panamia się do krazity bażbo stu miejsc. Sprozamy z usani rowywania niż osiał nas to przewawo gordarda estanie. No z inda żotianczmie wasznewo mutrzył. Ino nasz inu mutro przewesianali sopiertujenie w soliundat. Zatania był może nie wszli sadkogna i utożydziny kresti wienu suzania lamią. Zmiko nozu niewo szako i nazoino to, i przywiąco zuszła żazony jako blinie karaspi choż bostu nie swojewo guzanów. Domy banadady przerychozanie jak nieśnie uobraza kori. Mam zoszowirze najcenów. And the commander of Babylon 5 was the very person who was supposed to solve such problems and try, if not to reconcile the parties to the conflict, then at least to minimize the collateral damage to those not involved. No way. Better to just meet the new delegation.
The main thing is that it doesn't turn out to be the second Lord Baal, the woman muttered under her breath, patiently waiting for the ship of the new race to dock at the station's designated dock. The Lumati transport was strange. Ivanova had never seen such ships from any of the civilizations that had arrived at Babylon 5. The dark blue ship, as if covered in silver steel scales, was shaped like something between a spiky caterpillar and... No. The commander even found it difficult to give a more or less suitable description of the vessel she saw in front of her.
One thing was clear for sure. Even if the Lumati had not switched to using quasi-organics like the Vorlons, they were definitely close to such technology. Scaly skin was the first thing that came to mind when she saw the skin of their transport ship. Finally, the ship was parked and the dock's automation brought the passenger cradle to it, allowing passengers to descend from the height of the hatch to the floor level of the station. Ivanova straightened up, straightening up and giving her face a serious and polite expression. The delegates from the Lumati turned out to be two tall, wrinkled, old men dressed in richly embroidered clothes and a short, much more simply dressed humanoid, who looked just as unpleasant and evoked in the woman associations with the famous Hunchback of Notre Dame, but work is work. Welcome to Babylon 5, Ivanova greeted the guests with a slight smile.
I am Commander Susan Ivanova.
I am Kareli Murzan of the Lumati, the short humanoid replied with a short nod.
And you? The woman turned to the tall Lumati, who remained silent, simply looking at her.
I am Kareli Murzan of the Lumati, the short Lumati spoke up again. To avoid misunderstanding, he sighed, rolling his eyes for a moment. I will explain. The servant who is next to me, a tall alien, apparently the ambassador, pointed his finger at his short companion, is my interpreter. I speak through him. Can't you speak yourself? The woman frowned. This time, it was Kareli Murzan himself who rolled his eyes,
seemingly extremely disappointed and upset by such an uncomprehending interlocutor. Of course not. It would be a loss of dignity for me to come into contact with an inferior race. Before I can speak to you directly, I must decide whether your species deserves it. If so, we can honor your race with our presence.
Well, yes, that's wonderful. The woman smiled wearily, only by an incredible effort of will and self-control, refraining from showing her true emotions. Then, so that you can decide, I think it would be best to start by showing you our station? Yes, the shorty nodded. That would be wonderful. Excellent. Then please come this way. The commander made an inviting gesture with her hand, letting the ambassador and his tongue go forward to the passage to the elevator. Commander Ivanova had asked the universe that the new ambassador would not be a second Lord Baal? Forget it. It would be better if it was a second Goa'uld. And now, her instincts told the woman that this was going to be a long day. A very long day. Allowing herself a heavy sigh after making sure, of course, that none of her subordinates would see it, Susan quickly followed the Lumati delegation. Please, Commander Ivanova led the delegates through the open doors of the station's medical bay.
Both aliens entered, looking around the room with genuine interest and some bewilderment. They were especially interested in the separate medical boxes, in one of which, at that very moment, 2 surgeons were performing some manipulations on a patient, which was being observed by Dr. Franklin and a group of interns who had arrived at the station for training and work. As you may have already understood, this will allow us to use isolated boxes for non-humanoid patients who require special conditions and air mixture composition, since each box has its own atmosphere control module, isolated from the station one. In addition, the boxes can be used for biological and bacteriological research or, Franklin spread his hands, in the event of an epidemic hazard. Dr. Franklin, Ivanova called out to the medic. Good afternoon, Commander, the medic smiled, then, turning to the group, please forgive me. Next in order, you have an inspection of the isolation ward.
My assistant will show you around. Please follow him.
Having handed over his charges to the deputy who had approached, Stephen turned to Susan, casting a thoughtful glance at the representatives of the unfamiliar alien species accompanying her. He had, of course, heard that delegates from a new race that had only recently made contact with Earthlings were planning to arrive at the station, but he had not expected that this would happen today, and that they would come for a tour to see him in the medical bay. Are we disturbing you? Oh, no, the man shook his head. I was just showing our hospital to the new guys. Welcome to Babylon 5, gentlemen. Thank you, the short Lumati nodded. I have to explain, Doctor, Ivanova perked up. They have intercultural symbiosis, the doctor interrupted the commander. I've heard of such things, although this is the first time I've encountered it personally.
Doctor, you said that this room is intended for the treatment of species other than yours. The language of the Lumati ambassador addressed the medic, while the ambassador himself, with an independent look that simultaneously radiated curiosity and some disgust, began to walk around the room looking at the devices, the doctors working here and the patient in the isolated box. Yes, that's exactly it. I don't understand. The Lumati ambassador turned to Franklin with an irritated shrug. Why put so much effort? And effort into helping potentially inferior species. Evolution is always built on blood. The weak die to make way for the strong. By keeping the sick and wounded of other races alive, you spoil their genetic evolutionary purity. But I don't serve evolution, the doctor frowned, slightly puzzled. I serve humanity, even when the patient is not a humanoid.
Yes, but what will happen if the patient you saved through natural selection begins to displace representatives of higher species? You know, I think we should move on. Noticing the shock and displeasure on her colleague's face, Ivanova attempted to smooth over the tense moment, but Stephen still answered with Lumati. I don't believe that any form of life has an advantage over another. Yes, the short humanoid shrugged. We often hear this argument from lower species and those who sympathize with them. Wait a minute. Franklin raised his hand. You mean to tell me that if you saw a child bleeding to death, a child of a lower species according to your classification, and all it would take to save his life was to lift a finger, you wouldn't do it? We won't help, yes, but we won't harm either,
It's not our right or business to interfere. One race should help another only by not interfering with the natural course of things. In any case, thank you for the stimulating conversation, Dr. Franklin. You certainly have some strange views, but I'm sure that will pass with time. We can move on, Commander. The Lumati ambassador, considering the conversation over, turned around and headed for the exit of the room, leaving an irritated and almost angry Franklin to grind his teeth. Surprisingly, the short tongue of the alien depicted something resembling a shadow of an apology on his face, but everything happened extremely quickly, and the next moment he was already following his companion, moving away from the people, and Ivanova had no choice but to follow the accompanied guests, shrugging her shoulders at the doctor's silent question. It was a shame she brought them here. It was a shame. But who could have known that they would be so keen on the idea of helping aliens?
And who could have even guessed in the madness of a drug addict where this conversation would eventually lead?
Da tom, že takale ishte delegovim spojil pravdovu da žejete po Feriženi stara dišemja anahradna taka zaroa do vizbijene Nilja naszaniku modegatej naszeni paradeł pi je też z niej stoje zajazmarzeny szenie to verbal.
Lord Bal, these are representatives of the Lumati race, Ambassador Korlimurzon. Ivanova hoped she had not mispronounced the long name. And his companion, who speaks for him. This is a tradition in their culture, to avoid the possibility of accidentally communicating with representatives of a lower species. How curious! Baal's voice was filled with serious curiosity, mixed with the interest of an entomologist who suddenly saw a new species of butterfly. How is it? You people had a term for such a feature. Ah, intracultural symbiosis, exactly. Corone will be delighted. What do you mean? And who is Corone? The ambassador's tongue spoke up again.
You see, Commander Ivanova, Susan suddenly realized with some surprise that Lord Baal had completely ignored the Lumati as interlocutors, and it seemed he was doing it quite consciously and demonstratively. Such phenomena have not been encountered in our history, but scientists have assumed, albeit purely theoretically, the very possibility of such cultural features of the structure of society in underdeveloped species. Coron will be very interested to know that the theory has finally been confirmed. If you don't mind, the ambassador measured the Lumati with a sly, smiling look. Tell the Lumati ambassador that for many species, the ability to speak for themselves is one of the most important signs of the presence of intelligence in principle.
Ivanova turned her stunned gaze from the smiling Baal to the angrily flaring nostrils of the Lumati ambassador, who, of course, heard everything perfectly well himself, since he understood the language in which the conversation was being conducted. Oh, yes, the Goa'uld recovered. I understand that my words may seem too harsh to them or perhaps even offensive. In that case, I am happy to receive them at any convenient time to listen to everything they wish to tell me. Ivanova felt a chill run down her spine. She remembered very well the almost identical phrase Lord Baal had said in the council chamber upon his first arrival. And even more clearly, the woman remembered what was left of the Drazi cruisers that had decided to attack the ambassador's embassy yacht, which was near the station at that moment. Please excuse me, Madam Commander. Lord Baal bowed. I must go. Ambassador G'Kar has asked to convene the advisory council regarding recent events, and I would like to say a few words there. Yes, of course. The woman nodded frantically, watching the departing ambassador. Who was this ill-mannered man? The shorty literally tugged her by the sleeve. It was Lord Baal, the woman sighed, and he is definitely not human, although he looks very similar to us. But what does he allow himself to do? This is Lord Baal, Ivanova shrugged, feeling for the first time an indescribable pleasure from uttering a phrase that in other circumstances usually only caused the desire to hit someone with a heavy object. He is a member of the Intergalactic Empire. As I have already said,
His civilization has more than 1 million years of purposeful cultural and technological development and expansion. But, please, let's just continue your acquaintance with the station. Well, it seems I will have to apologize to Ivanova.
Well, at least send her a basket of sweets or invite her for a cup of tea. But I just couldn't resist. These Lumati were such arrogant and annoying jerks that… what am I talking about, yeah? In any case, I was indeed heading towards the council hall, and the fact that my route completely coincidentally passed not far from the station's medical bay, where at that very time Ivanova was cultivating delegates of the new race, well, that was definitely a simple and innocent coincidence. The council chamber was quite sparsely populated this time. Sheridan, Delenn, and G'Kar were already present at the table. Ivanova was definitely not up to it. Mollari was late as usual, and Kosh simply ignored the meeting, although, in theory, he was exactly the same member of the Presidium as the others. Good afternoon, I say, greeting those present with a short bow. Lord Bal? John looked at me with some surprise. Did you want something?
I am here at the request of Ambassador G'Kar. I nod towards the gloomy Narn, who seemed not to even notice my presence, deep in his thoughts.
Really?
Sheridan frowned in confusion, trying to understand why I could have been invited here, but Delenn, whom G'Kar had obviously visited before the meeting, just like me, clearly tensed up a bit. I could practically see the train of her thoughts. If the ambassador had come to her asking for Minbari help in the war with the Centauri, but she had refused him, then why could he have called me here? Had he come for the same purpose, asking for help? And what if I had agreed? The participation of such a major player in what was happening could change the balance of power in the galaxy dramatically, and not only the Centauri, but also many states of the League of Non-Aligned Worlds would definitely react to this. Exactly, I nod, sedately sitting down in the place in the corner that has long been considered mine. Gentlemen?
Londo burst into the meeting room, as always, unceremoniously and unexpectedly.
Lady, bowing briefly towards Delenn, Mollari sat down in his place. So, I am here. We can begin. What is the purpose of this gathering? Ambassador Mollari, Sheridan turned to the Centauri, twitching his cheek. I don't quite understand what your cheerfulness is all about here. Do I have anything to cry about, Captain? What, you don't think so? G'Kar jumped up. So, the captain slapped his palm on the table. So as not to turn the meeting into a farce to begin with, both of you will shut up. And now, Ambassador G'Kar, having waited a couple of seconds until both delegates actually fell silent in surprise, not continuing the squabble, John turned to the Narn. State your case. Of course, Captain. Taking a deep breath to calm himself, although it did not help much, the Narn ambassador stood up, leaving the table. No later than yesterday, the Centauri Republic attacked our colony.
During the attack, 2 of our cruisers, which were replenishing food in the system, an orbital station, and most of the infrastructure on the planet, were destroyed. The civilian population of the colony, fortunately, managed to leave the system, although they tried to actively prevent them from doing so. Snorted Mollari, shaking his head but still remaining silent, allowing his opponent to finish.
Yes, that's right.
Ambassador G'Kar turned sharply to Londo.
Your ships violated all agreements reached at the last meeting. You attacked a civilian transport trying to leave the combat zone. 5,000. 5. That's how many Narns died during the clash, and the defense of civilians from your ship's shots.
As I told Captain Sheridan, Mollari said, innocently running his finger along the tabletop. My government has provided quite convincing evidence that things were somewhat different.
This is monstrous impudence.
Ambassador G'Kar angrily slammed his fist on the table.
Exactly the opposite, the Centauri raised his voice. Yes, we attacked your colony, but there is a war going on, in case you forgot. And it was your captains who used a civilian vessel as cover, deliberately placing cruisers behind it. The captain of one of the ships provided a recording from the onboard cameras. The ambassador took a data crystal out of his pocket, demonstratively placing it on the table. The recording is fabricated, G'Kar continued to rage. Yeah, just like yours. The one you showed to Captain Sheridan and the others? Londo chuckled.
Gentlemen, please, Delenn spoke up. Stop. We need to sort this out calmly, and not…
To hell with calm. You see what's going on, don't you? The Centauri have never been honest. Captain Sheridan, you see?
Ambassador G'Kar, John sighed, looking grimly at the Londo crystal on the table. since both sides are providing evidence of their words and they completely contradict each other. We need to thoroughly investigate.
Ambassador Mollari, may we see your recording?
Of course, the Centaurian shrugged. That's why I brought it. Please, take it. Mollari pushed the information carrier towards the captain, leaning back in his chair with a satisfied smile. It was clear from his whole appearance that he was 100% sure of the reliability of his recording, which meant that, even if it was fake, everything was done at such an unattainably high quality level that it would be practically impossible to detect the deception. Well, or he was simply too confident in his luck. Ambassador G'Kar, the captain turned back to the Narn. Before making any decision, the council must examine the evidence provided, both yours and Ambassador Mollari's. You understand, right? So that's how it is, the Narn said, almost gritting his teeth. And they, that means while you're sorting things out, will continue to kill innocent Narns, Ambassador… No, Delen, G'Kar shook his head.
You have already expressed your position to Yeria, gentlemen, may I speak? Lord Bal? Дымых да конвресвожи даю амбассадор G'Kar. Вабужец виана инжерсву самосилоще креворо, петнапниже хыко и зопо эпочу соченче небы. Нистуй зазве ружны кардажьято. Difficulty consente jedina listonie żeniątu ciasadore ba ambasadorne reżimy. Zapecuje dawana wacino żenieścia. Izja i karnie wającame wergu żudyn tenekże to. Agment zdaristana ambasador janownienowni pacojo zarośpa i mowlena i majroszny. Lord Bal i yes. Delene momarazam nagąbane wszesusz się w rany i w bezmatownie nadaja mają całaży stację. Wiersze Delenu buliewon redzieje szejna, no i Apolonia stuje do Atianów diamej wieda. Nando nadwa się pierobiezania ksaneje, rzeszewoje krzeły na mieszaldynia brachamit. Jaką warne bulisze jagloba szonie, i oczeniego nas, wasze pierygo banaja kierarka. Bo z baranie obażnej zmaja nobielni ijo, wyliwianie go baszonie, bo w rustrowie kociniego w ruzoreki. The Gold Empire will not take an active part in the hostilities between the Narn Regime and the Centauri Republic. I shake my head, but this does not mean that we consider threats to civilians an acceptable method of waging war. In this regard, I want to notify you. I turn to Londo. Ambassador Mollari, that half an hour ago my government sent to every inhabited system belonging to the Narns whose coordinates were kindly communicated to me by Ambassador G'Kar. The pale G'Kar could only nod frantically, feverishly trying to remember when he could have had time to do this. A small observation probe. What? This is unthinkable. Mollari jumped up from his seat. Nevertheless, it is so, Ambassador. I smiled softly at the Centauri. These probes are designed to track the appearance of warships of the Centauri Republic in the system under their control.
Immediately after their detection, ships of the Gold Empire will be sent to the corresponding colony for protection, and if necessary, evacuation of the civilian population from the combat zone. I think there is no need for me to explain how an attempt to attack our ships by either side of the conflict will be interpreted. Under my gaze, first Londo and then G'Kar, nodded convulsively. I must inform my government of this. Of course, Ambassador Mollari. I nod to the Centauri, continuing to smile good-naturedly. Ambassador G'Kar. Yes. You must also soberly understand that this measure is aimed only, I emphasize the word with my tone, at protecting the civilian population. This means that there should be nothing foreign on the ships leaving the system, no soldiers, no saboteurs, no contraband ammunition or weapons. Do you understand me? I will convey your words to Kari, and I will make sure that they take them seriously.
It will be in your best interests, I nod to the ambassador, turning to the still stunned Delen and Sheridan. You have no objections, Captain? Madam Ambassador? This is a very unexpected statement, Lord Bal, the station commander said, clearing his throat. But I believe the Earth government will find no objections if it will benefit the return of peace to the galaxy, Delen replied, her voice shaking slightly. Minbar won't object, as long as… Madam Ambassador, I smile. The Gold Empire is never interested in escalating conflicts, but we have some experience in ending them. Yes, the woman nodded. Well… Sheridan glanced at everyone present and sighed wearily, banging his gavel, implying the end of the meeting. If no one else wishes to speak, I think that's all. Ambassador Mollari, we will carefully study your recording,
as well as the recording from the Narn boy. We need to put an end to the provocations that have begun.
Still in some shock, Londo nodded, turning slightly slowly and heading for the exit of the council chamber. Well, now let's place bets. How long will it take for a battle fleet of shadows to appear near my planet, and for more than a squad of shadows to appear at my cabin for an explanatory talk? Or will it be Kosh? Chapter 42. New roads. We don't look for easy ways. On difficult ones you get more experience. Folk art of D&D players. Lord Baal, G'Kar caught up with me in the hallway literally 20 seconds after the meeting ended. The Narn still looked nervous and his face showed a mixture of surprise, tension, and even mild panic, as if he had just sold his soul to the devil for a pack of crackers, and was now trying to figure out why and how the hell he had gotten to this point. But at the same time, there was a serious sense of relief in the ambassador's gait. After all, he really did care about his people, and the inability to protect at least the civilian population of the colonies weighed heavily on him. Ambassador G'Kar, turning to the man, smiling, "Was there anything else you wanted?"
Yes. No, the Narn shook his head. "I just wanted to thank you. And why did you decide to do so much for strangers by and large, for you intelligent ones?" The question, "and what will you ask in return?" was read between the letters in his phrase in a simply blatant way. It seemed that the ambassador had already stopped believing in altruism and goodwill. On the other hand, for an ambassador in the current reality, this is not at all an unnecessary skill. This is even good. War, Ambassador G'Kar, I shake my head slightly, never changes.
No matter how technologically and culturally developed a society is, starting or being drawn into a war, the first to suffer are always the civilians, who do not need this war at all. Yes. I gesture for the Narn to follow me, moving further down the corridor. There are always ideal patriots of their people, ready to fight and die for high ideals, even when they are not asked to, but the overwhelming majority of intelligent beings want only three things: to eat well, sleep softly, and not to be bothered. I don't quite understand. The relatives of Ambassador Mollari, whom you know well, dragged the Narns into a war that you absolutely did not need. Yes. I raise my hand, not letting the ambassador interrupt me. Your mutual hatred is obvious to everyone. The Centauri oppressed the Narns, and now the Narns are dreaming of taking revenge on them at the first opportunity. Do not deny, Ambassador, that you would have started the war yourself with great enthusiasm had you been prepared for it and confident of victory. I would like to say that you are wrong. G'Kar was silent for a few seconds, but then he sighed heavily and nodded in agreement with my words. But it is difficult to go against the truth. There is too much hatred between our peoples to be crossed out and forgotten. But still, why did I speak out so drastically at the council? G'Kar nodded. It's simple, Ambassador. As I already said, during a war, those who don't need this war suffer most often. I'm not the biggest altruist in this galaxy, I'll be honest, I grin. But still, the behavior of the Centauri during this conflict does not find a positive response in my heart. I think I understand you. The main thing is that you also understand that I was completely serious when I spoke about using this, humanitarian initiative. Under my serious gaze, G'Kar clearly felt uncomfortable, but still nodded. For military purposes. I will not tolerate the presence of military personnel and weapons on transport ships leaving your systems. The army must fight and not hide behind the civilian population for some shady purposes. Do we understand each other? Yes, Lord Baal. The Narn bowed his head to his chest, nodding for a moment. I will bring your words to the rest of the Kari, and I will do everything I can to ensure that they are wise enough to listen to them and take them seriously. But… Anything else, Ambassador? Yes, the Narn nodded. At the meeting you said that half an hour ago you had already sent something to our systems, the coordinates of which I gave you, but… The ambassador looked around, making sure that no one was eavesdropping. I didn't tell you anything. Really, Ambassador G'Kar? I smiled broadly.
These are such insignificant trifles. You'd better really contact the government and inform them of our cooperation to avoid, so to speak, misunderstandings. You'll agree it would be extremely inconvenient if your ships fired on the observers who came to your aid, wouldn't it? The full extent of the possible consequences flashed across the Narn's face. His right eyelid twitched, and a second later, G'Kar stammered an apology, said goodbye, and ran at a fast trot toward the nearest elevator, accompanied by the surprised glances of random bystanders. No, of course, I would not show retaliatory aggression against the Narn ships if they decided to, accidentally, fire at the modules I sent from the replicators, at least until a reasonable amount of time had passed, required to notify the administrations of all colonies of this species about the concluded agreement. But let it run through, it's good for your health. Chuckling and quietly whistling an unobtrusive tune, I slowly followed the fleeing ambassador.
I certainly had no reason to hurry. As I had announced at the meeting, small observer probes, almost identical to those I had sent earlier to study degenerate space, had been thrown into the territory of the Narn Regime before the Council began. In this version, they were elegant pyramidal structures containing a hyperspace engine, a power source, and a sensor array capable of covering almost the entire star system, and tracking the ship's exit into normal space, wherever they decided to jump out. And then it was just a matter of technique. Yes, from a certain point of view, it might seem that in this way I directly and unambiguously interfere in the conflict, acting on the side of the forces of light, automatically classifying myself as an opponent of the shadows, but this is not entirely true.
I did not lie to G'Kar and Londo. My participation in their confrontation will consist only and exclusively in protecting the civilian population, and my ships, being attacked in the process, will respond with equal success to both the Narns and the Centauri. It is difficult to call such an approach participation, isn't it? Interlude. Young Turhan. No, his name was Velias Latienia now, and the Centauri had to remember that. Even as the last and previously unknown representative of an ancient, thought-extinct line, it was worth preserving the concepts of honor and loyalty to tradition. After all, the Latienia line was an aristocrat.
After leaving the Gold Ambassador's quarters, Velias spent a decent amount of time digesting the changes that had occurred in his life, settling into a simple but fairly comfortable cabin, one of the many guest cabins on the station, used by travelers. The young Centauri left it only to eat something in one of the establishments in the station's recreation area or take a walk in the park section. The rest of the time, Velias thought and read the latest news from his homeland. And with each new news release, with each new article on the internet, the face of the former emperor of the Centauri Republic grew gloomy. The fact that the Centauri had unleashed a war with the Narns, barely waiting for his body to cool down, did not surprise Velias. In 30 years of ruling his people, he had learned and realized a lot, and the presence of an opposition that slept and saw the change in the course of the state, with the change of ruler, was not a secret for him.
Velias soberly realized that if he had not died on Babylon 5, it is unlikely that he would have lived much longer after returning to Centauri Prime. But nevertheless, the former emperor was glad of the changes that had taken place in his life. Yes, he would never agree to spend his entire life in idle inaction. The active nature of a courtier who had spent 30 years governing the state, and most of his previous life preparing for this process, would sooner or later require activity from him. But now, several years of youth and young manhood, the most pleasant and sweet years in the life of not only a Centaurian but any intelligent being in general, beckoned him with the promised variety of options. But the war. While at the station, Velias had already witnessed skirmishes between the Narns and Centauri on more than one occasion, only by some unknown favor of fate avoiding his own participation in what was happening. But this could not continue forever, and therefore he should have taken care of a quieter place to rest. What did Lord Ball say? To spend some time away from the large colonies of your people. Well, even when he was Turhan, Velias had long dreamed of visiting the Imolan Vive system. It's funny to think, but in all 30 years he had never found a free minute or opportunity to fly to the oldest colony of his people, which confidently attracted tourists from all known civilizations. Velias Latienia sighed and rose from the table in the small cafe in the Zocalo where he had been spending the last hour and a half pondering his future plans. Fortunately for him, the station was fairly calm today. The few Narns he had met in the corridor seemed to be simply ignoring the young and apparently incapable Centauri. Although perhaps it was because, as he had heard, the Narn Regime ambassador G'Kar, with his characteristically hot-tempered and emotional nature, was educating some of the Narn diaspora on the station, demanding that they observe at least a modicum of order. It was a pleasant surprise to realize that one of the parties to the conflict had enough reserves of prudence.
But the guy could no longer think about his own kind. The Centaurians he met on the station most often did everything possible and impossible to piss off the Narns they met on their way, forcing them to start a fight. And they themselves often did not limit themselves to provocations, moving from words to active actions almost immediately. Seeing such scenes, Velius tried his best to avoid them, perfectly aware that in his current state, any of these skirmishes would pose a serious threat to his health and life, and the Emperor still valued his new life.
Looking around, making sure he wouldn't get into anything unpleasant just by moving towards his goal, the young man picked up a small travel bag that was standing at his feet under the table and headed towards the elevator. He still had about 40 minutes left before boarding the Centauri transport ship heading to Immerse V, and by a lucky coincidence, he had the means to buy a ticket there, which he had done some time ago. Well, as departing, Immerse was not directly accessible from Babylon 5, but since the colony was a well-known tourist destination, almost every other flight leaving the station led somewhere in Republic space, where one could make a transfer and finally reach their destination. So here too, his transport was originally heading to the Ragesh system, which had suffered during the Narn attack almost a year ago, but nevertheless retained the role of at least a transport hub for sending onwards into Centauri space.
The elevator doors from the level opened with a quiet rustle in front of Velius, and the young Centauri, who had already taken a step forward, involuntarily froze, staring at the figure in front of him. The former Emperor did not know whether it was providence or a bad joke of the universe, but right now, in the very elevator that he had called, stood the ambassador of the Centauri Republic, Londo Mollari, in person. However, he could only be called an ambassador in name, according to Velius. A Centauri who was so drunk could not be called an ambassador, nor an aristocrat at all. Mollari stood in the elevator cabin, leaning against the wall and closing his eyes, and in his hand, miraculously not falling out of his fingers, rested a gilded cup, judging by the greenish drops on the floor under which once contained hala, a Centauri drink based on the juice of the halva tree. Are you coming?
Londo opened one eye, clearly struggling to focus on the young man who was in no hurry to enter.
The doors are closing now.
Yes, of course. Latinia sighed, twitching his cheek, but still took a step forward into the elevator, touching the touch panel and choosing the desired level. Decided to go along? Smiling at his companion, Londo pointed with his hand holding the cup at the bag in his hands. And right, I would fly away too, but I can't. I'm an ambassador. Without me, everything here will fall apart, and the Narns will feast on the ruins. Velius was surprised, and rather unpleasant, to see the usually extremely polite and well-mannered Mollari in such a state. During his time as Turan, he had met many aristocrats, and Londo was one of them. Each time he left the impression of an intelligent, resourceful, and very active representative of the noble families of the Republic.
And he was such. The former emperor remembered very well how useful services Mollari had rendered to the throne and the state, and he remembered very well that he had rewarded his courtier more than once, especially the last time when he had allowed him to dissolve 2 of the 3 hated business marriages. But now, do we know each other? I don't think so. The Centaurian shook his head very, very slowly, so as not to spill it. Although, wait, you definitely remind me of someone. Drunk. No, that can't be. Velius tensed, even beginning to consider what he would do if Mollari suddenly recognized him as Turhan, who had suddenly lost a century or so. But then the elevator finally reached the desired floor, and Londo, shaking his head in confusion, simply shrugged, unsteadily walking out into the corridor, saluting Latienia with a glass containing the remains of his jala.
The elevator doors closed, cutting off the Centauri from each other, and the former emperor breathed a sigh of relief, continuing his way to the level with the station's customs blocks. And only Londo Mollari, having taken a few steps out of the doors of the elevator that had long since left, stopped in the middle of the corridor, frowning in confusion and clearly trying to fish something out of his consciousness, clouded by alcoholic libations. Finally, superstitious horror appeared on the ambassador's face, accompanied by a sharp sobering up, and the Centauri himself slowly and carefully turned to the closed elevator doors, suspiciously shifting his gaze from them to the glass in his hand.
I think I should stop drinking, huh? No, or yes,
Mollari muttered.
I just saw the young emperor getting ready for a journey. My time has come, huh? But I have seen my end. It must not happen now.
Londo carefully and slowly crouched down, placing his goblet against the wall of the corridor with a trembling hand. He definitely shouldn't drink anymore. At least not today. At least not for the next couple of hours. Yes, that's right. Captain, Garibaldi called to Sheridan. Mr. Garibaldi? John raised an eyebrow in surprise, but no, he wasn't imagining it. The head of security, while maintaining his standard vigilant Joker appearance, was clearly under tangible tension, and he was standing in the doorway of the station commander's office, clearly wanting to communicate something very important. Got a minute? Michael looked out into the hallway, as if to make sure no one was following him. Of course, come in. The man nodded, still not fully understanding what could have caused such behavior. We should also call Ivanova, but oh well. Captain, since we've gotten ourselves into this whole thing with the president, the security officer began quietly.
In general, literally just now a coded message arrived from Earth. A certain Dr. Jacobs has been declared wanted by the entire system. I thought it would be important for you to know.
Jacobs? One of the president's doctors?
Now the captain frowned. That's him, or rather, he was the president's doctor, Garibaldi shrugged. Now he's on the run. According to the description, he left Earth using forged documents, taking with him classified information, I suppose, related to his professional activities. With professional activities, Sheridan stroked his chin thoughtfully.
Wait, what does this have to do with us? If this is a system-wide search, we would have received a dispatch through general command channels. I would have received they. The man's eyes flashed with understanding. They think he's flying to Babylon 5? They think he's already here, Michael raised his eyebrows suggestively. They're going to take him alive.
Or dead. Extreme sanctions against a civilian. Damn it, what's going on? What did he steal?
The captain slowly sank into his chair, looking thoughtfully ahead. The message doesn't say, but Garibaldi raised his finger. An agent has been sent to us who will coordinate the search. The order is to shoot to kill at the slightest resistance. I understand your gloomy look correctly, Captain?
Absolutely, Mr. Garibaldi. Sheridan smiled wryly. We must find Dr. Jacobs before the dog beaters do. We must find out what he knows. We'll do it. The head of security sighed, shrugged his shoulders, and giving his face an expression of calm indifference, turned towards the exit. Was this what General Haig had been talking about? Had someone on Earth managed to dig up some of the government's dirty laundry related to President Santiago's death? Sheridan drummed his fingers on the table, weighing the pros and cons.
Immediately after the general's departure, he had talked to his subordinates and they had all expressed the same emotion about what was happening. Something was wrong with this whole story. Now the hardest part was finding at least some confirmation of his rightness. Otherwise, it could well happen that he himself would be sent after the presidential doctor with exactly the same enthusiasm. It wasn't that John didn't trust his subordinates at all, but in such matters, even Michael Garibaldi's paranoia might not have been enough. As Garibaldi had reported, the special agent from Earth had arrived on Babylon 5 almost 2 hours after their conversation. Sheridan could only wince once again at how correctly everything was done in the Earth Commonwealth, when you were already happy that the message about someone's arrival came before this very arrival and not a week after.
Although jokes are jokes, but the captain understood perfectly well that in such important matters it was good that they were notified in principle. This meant that the station's crew was suspected of all mortal sins, at least not every day, but once a month. Or 2. However, this also added new problems. Now Garibaldi's men would have to search for Jacobs while simultaneously distracting the intelligence services, and this was not so simple. In any case, in such situations, the participants usually have no choice, so they will all have to do what must be done and in the conditions in which it is possible. Captain Sheridan, the man who entered his office as if it were his own home, walked quickly to the station commander's desk, showing with his whole appearance that he was now the boss here. My name is Derek Cranston. I represent the Special Intelligence Unit of the Office of the President of the Earth Commonwealth. My documents.
Agent Cranston, quickly running his eyes over the extended ID. Of course, drawn up with all conceivable clarity and in accordance with all conceivable laws and regulations. Sheridan nodded briefly to Ivanova and Garibaldi, who entered after the agent. Why does Earth need Dr. Jacobs? I believe, taking the captain's ID, Cranston sat down leisurely in the guest chair in front of the captain. You've already been informed. To some extent, the station commander nodded. We know that he was the personal physician of President Santiago. As far as I can tell, this implies access to some classified information. But the doctor used his official position to get access to proprietary information that was outside his area of expertise. Development of new technologies, some classified projects,
covert operations. This is enough to put an end to many, if not all, of our cooperation agreements with other species. We cannot allow this data to leak.
But when you fly in here to the station, find the buyer, Derek Cranston shrugged as if it was a self-evident solution. And at the same time get out of Earth's control zone. After all, Babylon 5 is far away. If it flies away from the station, we won't be able to get it. Good. Sheridan nodded, giving his face the appropriate concern. Mr. Garibaldi and his security service are at your complete disposal. Michael's face showed everything he thought about that statement, but he corrected himself in time, managing to feign readiness and nod as soon as the government agent turned in his direction. But something told Sheridan that he would still have his say in the matter with his superiors for such a setup. That's great, I'll send my squad leader to you and together you'll be able to search the station much faster. Commander Ivanova, John turned to the woman. Check all departing ships, he may try to leave Babylon by hiding in cargo containers.
Or he may change his identity again, unfortunately. It is quite possible to arrange this here, if only there was money. We will do it. I will take you to your cabins and then I will give the necessary orders. Thank you for your cooperation, Captain. Cranston extended his hand for a handshake. I hope we find him quickly. Commander Ivanova, I am all yours. With a short bow, the man, accompanied by Ivanova, left the office with the same quick steps, obviously heading off to give his own orders and arrange temporary accommodation for people at the station. As soon as he left, Garibaldi looked meaningfully at the captain, raising an eyebrow. A clever fellow. He knows how to say the right words. Michael grimaced. It seemed like he answered the questions, but in fact, he didn't say anything important. That's their job. Sheridan nodded. But they're clearly on edge there on Earth. If they haven't shit themselves yet, they are very ready to do so. John sighed.
The matter looks really serious and we'll have to help just as seriously. If the doctor is at the station, we will find him, but what if everything turns out to be different from what we were told? Either way, we can't let Jacobs of Babylon. If they are right, it'll be a national security threat. And if they are wrong, his information could still be too important to fall into the wrong hands. Got it. Garibaldi sighed. I'll go look for our prodigal doctor. I think I already know where to start. I seem to have reached that stage of boredom where I start inventing problems for myself just to find ways to solve them. I can't explain the fact that I've spent the last half hour fascinatingly, no joke, it was an interesting experience, designing a miniature Stargate and how to integrate it into the interior of my embassy cabin on Babylon 5.
The cornerstone of the project was the requirement for complete shielding of all energy and spatial distortions caused by the ring activation and the creation of the event horizon. But I did it. Since the vast majority of the wall panels in my cabin, as well as the furniture, consisted of standard replicator blocks with an outer layer modified to look like gold, I had an excellent opportunity to carry out arbitrary reconfiguration of the interior and structures of the room, being limited only by the external dimensions. No, nothing prevented me from working outside the cabin, but I suppose the technicians of Babylon 5 would not be very happy about the disappearance of several bulkheads and elements of the supporting structures of the station's hull. Under my gaze, some of the modules that made up one of the walls of the cabin shifted, forming a ring-shaped recess. My initial problem in this world was the absence of Naquada or Naquadri on the local planets, which immediately complicated the use of some technologies from the replicator database inherited from the ancients. These comrades, covered in the dust of centuries, loved this mineral very much, and it is not surprising given all the specifics of the physical parameters of Naquada, the yoke of isotopes and alloys. Yes, the replicators had now successfully, at least in theory, converted known technologies critical to the use of Naquada to the use of quantum 40, which in some properties resembled the missing mineral. But, almost immediately after this momentous event, I received at my disposal the technologies of the technomages, the energy source of which was strikingly reminiscent of the unforgettable MNT from my body's native world, which opened up simply colossal opportunities for further development.
Suffice it to say that the words energy hunger no longer had any meaning for me. Now, of course, I still couldn't create something like the crazy supergate that the Ori had depicted. The structure, which allowed entire cruisers and potentially even planets to be transported through the Stargate system, consumed an indecent amount of energy. Moreover, it consumed this energy once, forcing even the ascended relatives of the ancients to use an entire black hole to feed it.
But making a personal Stargate that would connect my cabin on the Babylon and the laboratory complex on the planet I had chosen was much simpler. Moreover, calculations showed that even the energy that the personal module of the Technomages could produce was enough to open and stabilize the wormhole channel created by the gate in such a small volume of transported mass within the galaxy, although, of course, this was practically the limit of its one-time throughput. So, from now on it was just a matter of time, and indecently high technology. Having made sure that the door to the cabin was securely locked, even disconnecting it from the Babylon 5 control system just in case, as if this particular door simply did not exist for the station's computer, I gave the command to form an Asgard teleportation module from my body's nanites. I could not use a similar one from the Babylon's emergency unit in case of an unforeseen escape, since in this case when I needed to synthesize a large volume of matter, its energy source simply would not be enough to do it quickly enough. Standing opposite the round recess in the wall, I extended my hand, and having opened the faucet for energy from the zero area of space to the full, I started the process of synthesizing the structure of the Stargate ring, reduced and refined to the parameters I needed. A thin beam of white light struck from my open palm, accompanied by the familiar grinding sound of the teleporter. And right in the wall, one after another, the elements of the ring began to appear. Unlike the original gate system, I did not need to create an address system and a coded dialing device, although of course I still put some semblance of an address mark into my creation, so that I could, if desired, connect any other gates to this one, should they be created in the future. Simultaneously with the process of creating the gate in the cabin, similar gates were being created right now in one of the halls of the residential module of the complex, located at the opposite end of this galaxy.
The only difference was that in the laboratory the gates were stationary, having more traditional dimensions of the can fit a truck level. This solution was recognized by me as more universal, in case of the need to transfer something large between planets without using ships and hyperspace. Finally, after 12 minutes 43 seconds and 15 milliseconds, having made sure that the process had been successfully completed, I stepped back 2 steps, casting a satisfied glance at the resulting installation. The replicator modules covering the cabin from the inside switched to the mode of suppressing all known types of radiation, which at least theoretically could be shielded, of course. And I, standing in the pathetic pose of a magician performing great sorcery, raised my hands above my head, let the abysses of space open up, submissive to my will. Or, how should one say it?
Unable to resist a little hooliganism, I power the entire structure from the Technomage module and give the command to open the wormhole. Curious. Unlike the canonical special effects, the gates open somewhat differently. Instead of a blue water-like vortex funnel bursting out of the gate ring and then settling in the form of an iridescent event horizon, in my case the wormhole opened differently. A series of crimson discharges ran along the contour of the gate, and as soon as they closed into a ring, the space inside the structure seemed to collapse into itself, revealing to my gaze a black void framed by a cloud of crimson sparks. Through the network of replicators, I saw that exactly the same special effects occurred at the other end of the gate in the laboratory, collapsed into itself, and now I had 2 holes in space leading into the void. Interesting. However, all the differences ended with the visual component. Even earlier, the replicator network had conducted theoretical modeling of the process, both using Quantum 40 and in the case of a sudden discovery of Nakwada, and even a test pair of gates had been built on 2 distant planetoids, and the results indicated that the laws of physics of this world differed insignificantly and should not have a negative impact on the processes used to open the gates. But seeing the ominous abyss with your own eyes was still not the same as using the cameras and sensors of the younger ones for this. Having synthesized the most primitive model of the Junior, I send the spider through the gate, tracking all the processes happening to it. However, despite the tiny worm of doubt, hinting that something can go wrong even in the most verified and experimentally proven process, the transfer of the spider in space itself occurred exactly as it should have, fully confirming all theoretical calculations.
For 1511 seconds, the Junior actually ceased to exist, moving into a state of energy information, and then the transport hall of the laboratory complex appeared in front of its sensors. Well, the experiment can be considered a complete success. The gate did not blow up Babylon 5, nor did it blow up the final destination, and the spider-like Junior was successfully transferred to the opposite end of the galaxy almost instantly. The only conditional drawback of such a system was the one-way transfer of matter.
The Stargate allowed the transition of matter into energy, into information, and then at the other end of the channel, in reverse order, only in one direction, from the entrance gate to the exit gate. The only thing that could pass in the opposite direction were some types of electromagnetic waves. Thoughtfully stroking my beard with my fingers, I set the task for the replicator network to conduct multiple test runs with various parameters and a selection of available technological solutions in order to find a way to make the gate system work in both directions. If this is possible in principle, everything will only rest on the presence of a continuous and stable flow of energy to keep the wormhole open. And with this, as you can already see, there will be no more problems. Having given the command to the gate from my side to break the connection, I watch as, with a quiet but quite recognizable sound, the event horizon in the ring collapses, again revealing the layer of replicator blocks that covered the walls of the embassy cabin. Nodding in satisfaction, I force the wall to close, restoring the previous appearance of the golden wall panels and hiding the presence of the Stargate ring in the wall. The day had been tedious to the point of disgust. Although Sheridan knew intellectually that Babylon 5 was no small space station, he had not realized how many technical passages, nooks, corridors and rooms there were that could, if desired, be used as a refuge or a place to play hide-and-seek. He now understood somewhat better the eloquent look Garibaldi had given the commander in response to his agreement to provide any assistance to an agent of the Earth government. And John wasn't the one doing the search himself. He was just directing it from his office and analyzing the information he was receiving together with Derek Cranston and Ivanova. But even that was as exhausting as if he had been scrubbing the decks of the Agamemnon with a toothbrush for 24 hours.
Yeah. Well...
Derek, having received the latest data from his subordinates, brought it up on the display on the wall and, quickly running his eyes over the lines, sighed.
We have conducted a full and thorough scan of all levels from the 1st sector to the 15th.
Only the most slums remained uncovered. You could lose the cruiser in pieces there, Ivanova grimaced. That's true, Sheridan sighed, but he simply has nowhere else to go. We've looked at all the more civilized places. He only has 2 options left. He could hide in the cabin of one of the ambassadors, or he could go underground, getting lost among the homeless and other rabble. We only checked the embassy sector superficially, Cranston spread his hands. Unfortunately, it is almost impossible to gain access to the ambassadors' cabins. However, it is unlikely that he is hiding there, the man frowned. The information he stole, of course, could be valuable, but such things are not decided so spontaneously. I agree, the captain nodded thoughtfully. However, there is one more place on the Babylon where he could hide. But
even in his circumstances, I would not risk going there. What kind of place is this?
Derek immediately became wary.
Right here, John pointed his finger at the station's diagram, between the building and the regeneration system. The nastiest place on the entire station, not counting the waste processing and methane baths. Thick lead walls, heavy equipment. Almost everywhere there you can only move by crawling and through technical tunnels. Lead walls? They can block the scanners. We absolutely must check. Derek raised the communicator to his mouth. Cranston here. Take the team out of the slums. Check levels 50 and 51 between the blue and grey sectors of the station. Thoroughly. Yes, sir. Thank you, Captain. Good tip. Inspired, Cranston quickly left the office, leaving the officers alone. You remember that these 2 levels were sealed from the beginning of Babylon 5's operation? Ivanov asked the commander ingratiatingly.
Can you imagine how many doors they will have to open, and at the same time how many tons of dirt they will find there?
Aha. Sheridan sighed contentedly, smiling. And I forgot to mention that 2 waste processing plants occupy part of these levels too. You're a cruel man, Captain. But Mr. Garibaldi will have 6 or 7 hours to find it himself. May I ask why you're so keen to catch Dr. Jacobs first? There are reasons for that. The communicator signal did not allow the captain to finish. Yes, Sheridan listening? Captain, one of the ambassadors asks to meet you, the duty officer's voice rang out. Can this wait? I don't know, sir. This is Ambassador Kosh. Kosh? Captain, Ivanova commented in a whisper.
In 2 years, Ambassador Kosh has never asked to meet with anyone at the station. Really? John also asked in a whisper. Yes. Duty officer, tell the ambassador that I'll be there soon. Understood, sir.
Sighing and exchanging puzzled glances with Ivanova, Sheridan straightened his uniform jacket and went to meet the ambassador. Although God knows, right now, he dreamed most of all of a large cup of tea and a couple of hours of peace and quiet. Yes, he would not mind finding out what the Vorlon ambassador was like, as well as the vast majority of intelligent beings on the station. But right now, such a sudden initiative of a secretive alien was somewhat inopportune. The only thing that stopped John from sending everything to hell was the important fact that such an opportunity might not present itself again. The ambassador occupied one of the cabins in the non-humanoid sector of the Babylon, although no one had the slightest idea what kind of atmosphere the Vorlons were accustomed to.
Some, including the captain, believed that Kosh had chosen a cabin with non-oxygen contents simply because it would reduce the number of curious guests bothering him. Even the guards did not particularly like to frequent the sealed corridors due to the need to wear an oxygen mask there at all times. You wanted to see me, Ambassador? After waiting for the airlock to equalize the gas composition and density of the atmosphere, Captain Sheridan stepped forward, entering the cabin. Kosh was already waiting for him, a lanky figure in a permanent spacesuit that resembled the skin of some living creature rather than an object of technological development. The surprising thing was that even here, in what seemed to be his native environment, the Vorlon did not remove his protection, as if not wanting anyone to see his appearance. It was you who wanted to see me. That's not surprising.
Everyone at the station would like to know who or what is hiding under the mask of Ambassador Kosh. The man circled the alien's figure with his hand.
They are not ready yet. They won't understand.
Not ready, the man frowned. Am I ready?
No, you don't even understand yourself.
Could you help me understand you? Every second spent near the ambassador caused the captain to feel more and more bewildered and confused. According to all eyewitness accounts and recordings of council meetings, the Vorlon ambassador was almost always silent, occasionally making monosyllabic statements that most often told his interlocutor absolutely nothing. He himself had seen it. And now? Can you help me understand you? Kosh answered with a question, slightly tilting his head to the side and, as it seemed to the man, squinting his eye with curiosity.
Well, I can try. Is that what you want? Information exchange? I can tell you about myself and you?
No.
You don't understand. Kosh sighed in disappointment, turning away. Go away.
What? John felt his eyelid twitch. And again, what the hell just happened? Ambassador Kosh had asked him for a meeting, but then when the captain arrived, he had, so to speak, spat in his face, said, "You're not coming, get lost," and turned away? Sheridan hadn't imagined it? No way. It couldn't be. "Excuse me?" the captain asked again, barely maintaining his composure. "Go away. You don't understand, and you won't understand. You're not ready." Only by a monstrous effort of will did the commander of Babylon 5 manage to refrain from sending the Vorlon ambassador on a long, winding route, a monstrous effort of will and the understanding that this would also be another violation of protocol and diplomatic rules, which the Vorlon seemed to not give a damn about. But it was impossible to leave this unanswered. Of course, this was not a reason to declare war or, say, break off diplomatic relations, but no.
Damn it! Are you kidding me? You called me here yourself, and now you arrogantly throw at me not ready, and that's it? From the minutes of the council meetings, it's clear that you didn't even come to every one of them. But as soon as I showed up at the station, I started to get the impression that you were following me, studying me, beating around the bush, keeping a meaningful silence. Who am I to you? A toy?
Kosh remained silent, continuing to stand with his back to the captain, and, it seemed, completely ignoring him. With a twitch of his cheek, the man turned on his heels and with a sharp movement poked his finger at the door-opening sensor. If the ambassador wants to play games, let him play them himself, and Captain Sheridan will have other, much more important things to do. And they will definitely not be here. Proud, the Vorlon's voice sounded behind him, seemingly filled with disappointment. Inappropriate. In vain. What?
John turned around slowly, sighing.
What do you want?
The next moment, Captain Sheridan literally felt the hair on his body stand on end. Ambassador Kosh, who had been standing with his back to him until now, turned around abruptly, squeezing the diaphragm of his eye almost to a point, which gave him a somewhat evil look, and even jerked forward, forcing the man to take a step back,
surprised by such a reaction to a simple question. Never. Don't ask such questions. At least some kind of answer, already an achievement. What next, Ambassador Kosh? With a huge effort of will, maintaining a confident appearance, Sheridan straightened up, looking straight into the Vorlon's eye. I will teach you, the Vorlon exhaled. Understand you? No, understand yourself. Until you are ready. What for? The captain shook his head in surprise. To not believe in legends.
The ambassador turned away again, but this time, John clearly felt that this was it. The conversation was over, and he had better leave. He literally felt it with his whole body. The Vorlon was no longer interested in the conversation, or in his presence in his cabin in general. Mentally cursing, Sheridan headed for the door. Next time, if you need anything, Ambassador, please make an appointment with me and come in person. Without waiting for an answer, the captain left the cabin. The day was becoming not just tiring, but also very strange. It remained to hope that Garibaldi would quickly find the fugitive doctor, and all this fuss would be worth the effort spent on it. Chapter 43. Reconnaissance in Force? Steelitz, do you admit that you are a Russian spy? No way, I'm just having fun. Folk art. Interlude. Londo Mollari sat at the bar of one of the establishments in the Zocalo, sipping his fifth fruit cocktail, looking extremely grim. He nodded automatically in greeting to the Centauri and alien acquaintances who passed by, but the Centauri ambassador's thoughts were a little further away than Babylon 5. Ambassador Mollari's thoughts were somewhere out there, on the battlefields of the war he had started with the Narns, a war that had recently become a much more difficult undertaking than he would have liked. I was told you wanted to see me, Ambassador? Mr. Morden's polite voice coming from behind the Centauri made Londo's cheek twitch, but he still managed a welcoming smile and turned to face the man. Mr. Morden, please, sit down. The ambassador gestured to the shadow messenger to take a chair next to him, and then gestured to the waiter to repeat the cocktail. I'm listening, Ambassador. Is something bothering you? To tell the truth, yes, Mr. Morden, Mollari sighed. Our war with the Narns seems to be in danger of going in a direction I would not like. Excuse me?
The man raised an eyebrow in surprise. As far as I know, your army is doing just fine.
He smiled with a slight sneer. After all, you have won several resounding victories, demoralizing your enemy, and now... That's right, Mr. Morden, but you're probably a little out of touch with the latest news. In that case, enlighten me, Ambassador Mollari. The shadow emissary frowned, as if listening to something only he could hear. If Mollari was saying something was wrong, his employers needed to know about it, and soon. And the fact that he, Morden, hadn't heard any serious news lately was even more alarming. Londo was, of course, somewhat prone to exaggerating the problems around him, to impulsive actions and decisions, which was one of the reasons he had been chosen over the other ambassadors, but he was certainly no fool.
At the last meeting of the Babylon 5 Advisory Council, Londo glanced with a clearly somewhat drunken expression at the cocktail glass placed before Morden by the waiter, and raised his eyes to his interlocutor. Lord Bell spoke, Ambassador of the Goa'uld Empire? The man frowned. That's it. The ambassador nodded. He reported that he had sent his observation probes to all, the Centauri emphasized the word with his tone, inhabited systems of the Narn Regime, which will be there and monitor that during the military actions, the civilian population of these systems does not suffer in any way. This, Morden listened to something again. This is not the most pleasant news, Ambassador Mollari. I know myself that this is unpleasant news, Londo almost hissed, so he will not just watch. He declared that if necessary, he will send his ships to any of these systems to ensure the safety of this very civilian population. I'll have to report this to my employers.
I think we can find a way out of this situation that will suit all interested parties.
But what should we do while you're looking for this way out? I can't just write home and say, let's wait a week, let's not fight. Besides the fact that I'll be laughed at, the Narns will take advantage of the delay. If G'Kar was able to find support in Lord Baal so quickly, only the gods know who he'll negotiate with next. Earth? Minbar? Maybe the Vorlons? Mr. Morden grimaced at the mention of the Vorlons, as if he had just eaten a very, very sour lemon. I don't think it will go that far, Ambassador Mollari. I'm sure a decision will be made very, very soon. But what should we do now? Fight. The man who had gotten down from the bar stool glanced at the Centaurian. You're doing pretty well at it so far.
But Lord Bal, my employers will solve this problem, Ambassador. Morden bowed his head, no longer smiling.
I'll let you know when you can relax. The Shadow Messenger left, leaving Mollari alone with himself and the cocktail. 2, since Morden hadn't even touched his glass. Sighing, the Centauri drank the rest of the drink from his glass in one gulp and pulled the vessel closer to him, next to him. Observation probes in every inhabited system of the Narn Regime, where there is a civilian population. Why did this Bale come out with his altruism now? It was fortunate that the Republic fleet had no major raids planned on enemy territory in the near future, according to general opinion. The first success would serve as excellent psychological pressure on the Narns, and in order to develop it, it was necessary to give them time to comprehend what had happened, to start getting nervous in anticipation of a new attack. It remained only to hope that Morden, as promised, would once again solve the problem that had arisen and would manage to do it in time.
Ambassador! Ambassador Mollari!
Out of breath, Veer walked quickly to the counter, throwing up his hands.
Londo, you're drunk again. Have you forgotten? You have a communication session with the Minister of Defense in 10 minutes.
Oh, Veer, Londo sighed. If you only knew how much I want, I see what and how you want. But, Londo, the attaché cast a disapproving glance at the battery of empty glasses next to the ambassador, Minister of Defense. Coming, pay. Londo waved his hand, picked up his unfinished cocktail, and walked unsteadily towards the elevators from the level, the Minister of Defense. Of course, Virkoto could only sigh sadly, taking out his wallet and look questioningly at the bartender, waiting for him to announce the amount. Once again drunk, spent on work needs by the representative of the Centauri Republic.
My speech at the council definitely made a splash, despite the fact that only members of the Presidium were present. Within a few hours, half the station knew about some change in balance in the conflict between Narn and Centauri. Of course, even the Shadows knew about what had happened without even looking at the station's video surveillance system. It was completely obvious that Ambassador Mollari would report such an unexpected and serious change in the situation to Morden and therefore to his masters. The replicator network gave a probability of slightly more than 40%, 41.319% to be precise, that the Shadows, given their behavior pattern in the current cycle, would first try to negotiate with me peacefully, sending the same Morden to make me an offer that no one usually refuses. I would even say that the probability of such an event is much higher than a cautious analysis of the network. But the main question was how the Shadows would behave if they were refused or their instructions were ignored. Well, we'll see, as they say. Besides, in the very near future, I definitely had something to do. The project of new platforms for Corona and Yuki was already completed. Thanks to the fact that I already had some experience, everything went as usual. The new bodies were no different from the previous ones, having only a different element base, being completely composed of a swarm of nanites, similar to my own. The only subtle moment in such an upgrade was the relocation of the girl's personal matrix to a new container. Neither I nor the replicators could give a clear and absolutely certain answer as to how much this transfer would affect the girl's already established personalities. On the one hand, their entire self was based on a very complex, developing now, I could say this with complete certainty, and branched program code. On the other hand, here the same question arose as with any organic mind: what is the self? In the sense of whether the personality and mind of any intelligent being are just information recorded on any medium, or could consciousness exist only as a combination of information and hardware? I had no idea about it even in my own case, let alone the girls, so Corona and Yuki were now thinking. Neki, using all the possibilities of the replicator network and the laboratory complex, analyzed the upcoming platform change and tried to decide how much they were willing to risk changing bodies. In the end, it was up to them to decide on this matter.
Yes, no one prevented them from creating another artificial personality similar to their minds, settling it in a similar body, and after waiting for the emergence of self-awareness, conducting a natural experiment, seeing how it all ends. But even omitting all the moral aspects of such a decision, and they, in my opinion, smelled of a not very pleasant substance, such an experiment would require time comparable to the original process. A full-fledged personality that went beyond the original program code was formed in Coroni for more than a year. Years of communication with me and the surrounding intelligent beings,
And no, this is not a cowardly shifting of the burden of responsibility onto the fragile shoulders of the girls. Yes, let's write it down.
In the meantime, I will continue a leisurely walk through the park area of Babylon, admiring the views and indulging in deliberately ignoring information from the replicator network so as not to eavesdrop on the conversation of two long-eared sisters.
Lord Baal!
The station captain's voice called out to me from behind.
Wait! Lord Baal!
Captain Sheridan? I stopped on the path with an expression of attentive surprise on my face, looking at the officer who was catching up with me at a quick pace. Good day to you. How can I help you?
Phew!
John exhaled, drawing level with me. Good day to you too, Lord Baal. Forgive me for being so unceremonious. I hope I won't disturb your walk. Not at all, I smile, waving my hand around the park. After all, this is a public park, not my personal garden. Thank you. The captain and I walked in silence for a while, listening to the gentle rustle of the artificial wind in the crowns of the fruit trees and enjoying the views. The man was clearly preoccupied with something and was probably going to ask me for a favor, but he couldn't quite decide how much he was willing to ask me for something. Tell me, Lord Baal, Sheridan finally said slowly. Your statement at the Babylon 5 Council meeting, was it impromptu or was Ambassador G'Kar too insistent? More likely the second, Captain. I shake my head with a smile. However, our civilization, as well as myself, really considers the involvement of the civilian population in military actions to be a decision deserving of all kinds of censure. But, Sheridan frowned. Of course, I throw up my palms in front of me. You can always talk about duty to the motherland, about protecting your world from invasion, but all this is the work of soldiers, the army, the navy, finally. I have familiarized myself with the publicly available information about the civilizations presented on Babylon 5, and in the overwhelming majority of them, there is no ban on an ordinary citizen becoming a military man for one reason or another. I spread my arms, turning towards one of the gazebos, hidden behind thick bushes, inviting them to follow me. But this does not mean that a simple miner, builder, or scientist doing his job should serve as a bargaining chip in a clash of armies. It seems I understand your logic, Lord Baal. I believe you understand. I nod. That is why I intend to do exactly what I said. If the war between the Narns and Centauri comes to one of their systems that has a civilian population, our ships will make sure that the war remains a military matter. But you understand that Londo will not calm down? Although I try not to take anyone's side in this conflict, but, as do I, Captain Sheridan. I nod.
And yes, it is equally obvious to me that reason can refuse both Ambassador Mollari and his government.
Well, I have said it more than once, and I will repeat it again. If they decide to declare war on the Goa'uld Empire, or in any other way show aggression towards us, I will gladly listen to them.
Listen!
A look of recollection flashed across Sheridan's slightly pale face, although he himself had not been present at that memorable incident with the Drazi, having seen it all much later and on the station's surveillance cameras. The story was still circulating among the officers of Babylon 5, and Ivanova had probably enlightened her new superior about some peculiarities of local political relations. It's funny, by the way, but since then, the Drazi had simply tried to keep their distance, generally giving me a wide berth when accidentally bumping into me in the station's corridors. Of course, Captain. It's one thing not to support the idea of escalating conflicts, but it's quite another to ignore someone else's stupidity. However, I look closely into the man's eyes. I'm unlikely to be mistaken if I say that you found me not so much for the sake of clarifying some points about the current situation and satisfying your curiosity. Is there anything I can do to help you personally? I feel extremely uncomfortable asking you such a question, Lord Baal. Sheridan hesitated. But sometimes situations arise when the question of personal convenience should be put aside. I'm listening, Captain. I sit down on one of the benches in the gazebo, inviting the station commander to sit down opposite. As they used to say on Earth, they don't take money for asking. What? Ah, yes. Lord Baal. The man sat down on the bench opposite. I think you heard that the death of President Santiago, which happened a few months ago, caused a certain amount of unrest in my homeland and in the colonies.
Yes, I've heard such rumors, I nod. However, there is nothing surprising. The death of the head of state, even from old age, sometimes leads to… incidents. What can we say about an unexpected and not entirely natural death? It's also… John hesitated, obviously choosing his words and trying to figure out how to say everything so as not to set himself up or set up someone connected to him. Literally a couple of days ago, information reached me that one person, a doctor who worked directly with the president and his close associates, has evidence that the death of President Santiago could have been staged. It was an assassination attempt with the aim of a coup d'etat. An assassination attempt? An assassination attempt, Sheridan nodded. This man, Dr.
Jacobson, is now at this station, I suppose. I thoughtfully stroke my beard with my fingers, that it is precisely his presence that is connected to the increased activity of Mr. Garibaldi's employees and… the visit of some high-ranking officials from Earth? You see, Lord Ball, Sheridan sighed heavily. At first, I didn't believe the information that reached me, but after Mr. Cranston's visit, I've been around for a while, and I can understand when someone is trying to pull the wool over my eyes. Curious. Sheridan clearly wasn't particularly eager to hand over the doctor to the government. It was quite logical after all. President Santiago was really killed and, as far as I remembered the details, the new president, Clark, information about whom Dr. Jacobson had stolen, was involved in this event to the fullest extent. What wasn't clear to me was why the captain came to me. In canon, he turned to Kosh. Very curious. Okay, I nod. I think I understand the essence of the situation. What exactly is your difficulty, Captain? Okay, the man exhaled. In the very near future, Mr. Garibaldi will find where Dr. Jacobson is hiding, and I really hope he will do it before Cranston finds him. But the Earth Special Agent will not rest on his laurels. He has access to the internal scanners of Babylon 5, and with their help, it will not be difficult to find one specific government employee, even a fugitive. I understand that this is a lot to ask, and strictly speaking, neither you nor your empire cares about this problem. But do you have the opportunity to hide the doctor so that he is not detected during the scan? He is unlikely to decide to inspect the embassy ship, and your ship, as far as I know, is in the docks of Babylon. Okay, Captain, I nod slowly. If Mr. Garibaldi copes, bring the doctor to my cabin.
To the cabin, Captain. I'll take care of the rest.
I understand. What will I owe you for this service?
An answer to one question. I tilt my head to the shoulder with a slightly sarcastic smile, which you will give to yourself.
Question?
Sheridan looked at me, puzzled. Why, of all the ambassadors, did you come to me? Having made a short bow to the captain, who had become very thoughtful, I smoothly rose to my feet, slowly walking further along the path. In fact, there was absolutely no problem in hiding Dr. Jacobson from the Babylon 5 scanners. These same scanners had long been working well for my humble person, and for the replicators, it was easier to fake the readings of any technical device of such a level of technological development than for Lieutenant Rzewski to blow his nose into a curtain.
And this if we don't recall the important fact that the layer of replicator blocks, which made up the entire inner surface of my cabin, was completely impenetrable to any version of electromagnetic scanning that the local engineers could come up with. Interlude. The war has not yet reached the Narn Regime colony of Zok, although the general situation in the surrounding systems has long been very, very tense. And it was becoming increasingly clear to the captain of the heavy cruiser Garitis, which was on duty in the system on a permanent basis, an elderly Narn named Gaturon, that the calm simply could not last long.
Captain.
The senior assistant approached the Narn and gently touched the commander's shoulder.
What is it, G'Kar?
The ship's captain turned his head.
You should go get some sleep. There's nothing worse than losing your vigilance due to exhaustion. We can handle monitoring the system on our own, and if anyone else shows up, I'll wake you up right away.
Outsider. Gaturon sighed,
casting a gloomy glance at the observation window, in which brightly, glittering with golden edges, in the light of the local star, drifted an elegant golden pyramid. This object appeared in the system completely unexpectedly. Just a few hours ago, the cruiser's sensors recorded a surge of energy of an unknown nature, and a few minutes later, when the crew brought the ship to the right point, they saw what they saw. Only G'Kar knows how this situation could have been resolved, if not for the message from Kari, which came via coded communication, ordering not to approach the objects that appeared even at ship's shut. Objects. According to the message, similar pyramids appeared in literally all inhabited systems belonging to the Narns, and the captain could vouch for his ship and the system under his control.
Zok was a small colony.
There was no busy ship traffic or military base, so the object, which did not show any threat, was simply and calmly taken under surveillance. He did not even want to imagine what was happening in more populated worlds. Yes, perhaps I should rest. G'Kar tiredly rose from the captain's chair, letting his assistant take his place. G'Thor, you are in charge. Wake me in 3 hours unless something unexpected happens. Yes, sir, Captain. As soon as the Narn left the cruiser's bridge with a tired gait, the space on the strictly diametrically opposite side of the system from the Golden Pyramid began to ripple slightly, and the next moment, 3 black ships emerged from nowhere, seemingly absorbing light. The appearance of the uninvited guests went completely unnoticed by the Narn cruiser's sensors, but it did not go unnoticed by the owners of the Golden Pyramid. What the? G'Thor stared at the sensor readings in shock. I'm not imagining this, am I?
I don't think so. The captain hoarsely exhaled, having managed to move away only to the turn of the corridor, and therefore quickly returning back at the first sound signal from the computer. A computer signal reporting the appearance of 3 massive unidentified targets in the Zok system, appearing in bright bluish-white flashes that had illuminated the void of space near the Golden Pyramid a moment before. The cruiser's sensors were recording a completely meaningless set of signals, but their source was visible even to the naked eye directly opposite the Garides. 3 colossal ships in the shape of golden tetrahedrons, with protruding superstructures around one of the edges, were hanging in the space of the Zok system. These were Goa'uld Empire ships.
The captain's face tightened. If pyramids had arrived in the system, then there was an enemy out there somewhere. Kari's message had been quite clear. The small golden pyramids that had appeared in the Narn Regime systems were observation stations sent by the Goa'uld Empire's ambassador to Babylon 5 to protect the world's civilian populations from Centauri attacks. G'Kar didn't know, and didn't want to know, how anyone's ships could promptly arrive in any of the Narn-occupied systems in response to an alarm, but… Battle alert, the captain ordered sharply. Full scan of the Zok system. Search for Centauri. Yes, sir, Captain. The sensor array operator was already busily switching the scanner ranges, trying to detect the enemy, but the sensors continued to show emptiness. There was nothing on them except for the known infrastructure objects of the colony around. Or was there? For a moment, G'Kar thought that at the very edge of perception, something blocked out the distant stars, as if a shadow had run across the cosmic void. But no matter how hard he tried to strain his vision, he couldn't make out the details. Check square 34171, the captain ordered. I saw something. There's nothing there, the first assistant answered puzzledly, checking the sensor readings. Just empty space. What kind of mysticism is this? The Goa'uld ships continued to hover near the observation station, as if demonstrating their presence and readiness for action to someone invisible. But there was nothing and no one in the system, neither on the scanners nor visually. Even the shadow seen by the captain no longer showed itself. Captain? The first officer called to the Narn. The system is clear, Captain. I don't know why they came, but perhaps the Centauri spotted them from hyperspace and didn't dare bother? Maybe. Instructions. Alert level orange. After a moment's thought, G'Kar gave the order. All posts continue observation. Ship radio on signal. I don't like what's happening. Yes, sir, Captain. The Zok system was empty and quiet. The shadow ships disappeared as quietly and unnoticed as they had appeared, seeping back into degenerate space, clearly not wanting to meet the Goa'uld hot ducks. And after a while, the Golden Pyramid ships also flew away,
In front of each of them, a blue glowing cloud of energy flared up in space for a moment, and they, as if drawn into it, disappeared. Only the Narn heavy cruiser and the elegant golden pyramid, its golden edges brightly glittering in the light of the local star, remained in the system. And only 3 hours later, the captain cancelled the combat alert. Alert, Captain.
Sheridan entered the breach of Babylon 5 with a slight thoughtfulness on his face, but Commander Ivanova could still clearly see that her commander was incredibly pleased with something.
Commander Ivanova, the man nodded with a smile, walking forward. You found the treasure in the park area of the station? The woman raised an eyebrow. What? No. Sheridan shook his head. I just think I've solved our little problem. Doctor. Exactly, Commander Ivanova. The captain nodded seriously. I have every reason to believe that Dr. Jacobson is not on the station. Before the woman could even begin her remark, a rumpled and clearly tired Agent Cranston entered the bridge. The man sighed, put a serious, focused expression on his face, and walked quickly toward the officers standing in front of the bridge's observation window.
As Sheridan had predicted, the search teams that had combed the station's service tunnels had returned angry, tired, and dirty as if they had bathed in a sewer. But Agent Cranston himself still radiated a work-related zeal and enthusiasm, at least what remained of it. Or was it the effects of an overdose of stimulants? Good evening, Captain, he nodded to Sheridan. Commander Ivanova, is the station's system ready? Yes, sir, the woman nodded. The internal scanners are set to work in conjunction with yours. If the plans have not changed, we can begin. Check again to be 100% sure that the systems are compatible. Yes, sir. Sighing, the commander punched out several commands on the keyboard, displaying the results of the system diagnostics and statistics of the changes made to the settings. Everything is compatible. The predicted scanning accuracy is 5 meters. Excellent. We can begin. Captain? Cranston turned to Sheridan. Go ahead, Commander, John nodded. Ivanova nodded, starting the scanning process.
The central display showed a schematic model of Babylon 5 with sectors and levels marked, and next to it, statistics of detected signals matching the specified parameters of the beacon implanted in Dr. Jacobson were kept. Despite its impressive size, the entire station was covered in literally a minute. The displayed result was blinking rhythmically. The object was not found. Ivanova stated the obvious. What? Damn it, that's impossible. Cranston stared at the display indignantly. My information was accurate. Jacobson has arrived on Babylon 5. Sir, if he wasn't detected by Babylon's scanners, then he's not on the station. Mr. Cranston, Sheridan asked in an extremely ingratiating tone. You've set the entire station on its ears. Because of your raid, Mr. Garibaldi had to arrange a good 30 overtime shifts for his people. If you now tell me that it was all in vain.
Captain Sheridan, Derek Cranston began, grimacing. Dr. Jacobson should be here. He had nowhere else to go but Babylon 5. The man pointed at the image on the display. He had… Wait a minute. The government agent frowned, pressing a button to zoom in on a section of the station's layout. Why is this section highlighted in gray? Allow me. Ivanova blinked in surprise and pushed Derek aside, peering at the image. This is the embassy level. The cabin. The woman raised her surprised gaze to the captain. Commander, Sheridan raised his eyebrows. This is Lord Baal's cabin, sir. And for some unknown reason, the system was unable to scan this area. At all. What do you mean, couldn't? The captain's face reflected completely genuine surprise. Some kind of interference, sir. Something, yes. Ivanova brought up a detailed text summary of the results on the screen and nodded. Judging by the scanner data, there is something there that is completely blocking their work. What the hell, Captain? Cranston frowned even more. How do you explain this? This is Lord Baal's cabin. John shrugged, feeling incredible inner pleasure from saying this phrase. So what? The agent didn't understand. It's just, this is Lord Baal's cabin, the captain repeated, barely holding back a smile, and seeing from the face of Ivanova, who was standing behind Cranston, that she was barely holding back a laugh. We didn't inspect the ambassador's cabins. Of course, since the embassy cabins are the territory of another state, Agent Cranston, Ivanova said with some uncertainty in her voice. He must be there. Mr. Cranston, Sheridan shook his head with a tired sigh. I do not know the limits of your authority, granted to you by President Clark, but if you wish to search the cabin of the ambassador of another state, especially this ambassador,
The man spread his hands. You and only you will deal with all the consequences of such a decision. Derek's face showed serious thought. The government agent was clearly weighing the pros and cons, struggling internally between his desire to capture the fugitive medic and his fears of causing an international diplomatic scandal. Finally, the man closed his eyes, took a deep breath and exhaled, holding his palms out in front of him, admitting defeat in the argument. You are right, Captain. It is unlikely that Dr. Jacobson would hide in the cabin of a foreign ambassador. For that, he would have to have had, at a minimum, previous contacts with this ambassador, and none of the sources of information indicate this. You are right. Please forgive my harshness. Agent Cranston, John sighed wearily again. Since we have just come to the conclusion that Dr. Jacobson is not on the station, I believe your mission can be considered completed. Commander Ivanova. Yes, sir.
We still have to help Agent Cranston in his search.
Download from the system all flights from the station on which the doctor could have even theoretically flown, and give a copy to our guest. Give him all the routes of the transporters, all the unusual flights outside the schedule, everything he asks for.
I'll do it. Ivanova nodded and turned to the terminal. Is there anything else I can help you with? The captain turned back to Cranston, still smiling. I doubt it, the man sighed, shaking his head. Unless you arrange a convenient flight for me from the station when Commander Ivanova finishes collecting data. No problem, Sheridan nodded. I will be happy to provide you with the most comfortable flight from Babylon. By the way, before departure I advise you to visit the park area of Babylon 5. John rolled his eyes dreamily. There are orange trees in bloom. It is calming.
Thank you for the advice, Captain. Cranston with a forced smile nodded to Ivanova and the captain. And for your cooperation? I will certainly inform my superiors about your invaluable assistance in this matter. Derek once again threw up his hands, even though we were unable to find anything. The agent walked at a measured pace towards the bridge exit. After watching the man leave, Sheridan turned to the observation window with relief, staring relaxedly at the starry sky. A slight smile played on the captain's lips. I see, Ivanova smiled. The mantra about Lord Baal has found a response in your soul. I'll pretend, the captain said, continuing to smile, that I didn't notice the mockery towards my superior in rank. Yes, sir, the woman said, perking up. But you're right. There's something to it. This is incredible. Lord Baal, shaking his head, Dr. Jacobson once again ran his eyes over the information displayed on the terminal screen.
Now, I understand that, with a sufficiently advanced level of technology, creating an artificial ecosystem is not difficult. Take, for example, the same Babylon 5. The man waved his hand around the cabin. But you claim that the very creation of this ecosystem on an initially dead planetoid is economically profitable. I cannot understand this. Well, judge for yourself, Doctor. I smile, pouring my interlocutor a fresh portion of tea. If we take any ready-made world with a developed ecosystem, we will be forced to adapt to its conditions one way or another. Local viruses, bacteria, plants, I list, smoothly gesturing with my free hand. Highly developed life forms, possibly aborigines. All this will have to either be destroyed or adapted to, or, if ethical principles do not allow us to interfere with the surrounding worlds, find another planet.
But, yes, I nod. An empty planetoid often doesn't even have an atmosphere. I agree with that. But it also doesn't have, owners. Having flown there, you won't destroy a single species, except perhaps in rare cases of discovering something there that has adapted to life in a vacuum. This also doesn't fit in my head. Jacobson shook his head. Without false modesty, I can consider myself quite knowledgeable in biology, and not only of man, but biological life in a vacuum. I'll tell you more, Dr. Jacobson. Life is possible even in a degenerate space, although of course it hasn't been encountered yet. Oh, Lord Baal. The man shook his head, sipping his tea. I wish I could someday see all those things you talked about. Perhaps you will see it again, I smile, turning my head towards the door, exactly a second before the bell signal rang in the cabin. Come in, Captain. I soothingly raised my hand to Jacobson, who twitched nervously, giving the command to open the door.
Lord Baal. Sheridan nodded and walked into the room. The man looked tired, but there was still a smile on his face, like a man satisfied with his work. It seemed that the matter of the government agent and the search for Dr. Jacobson could be considered closed, at least for the moment. I suppose you finally resolved your little difficulty? Yes, the captain nodded. Agent Cranston will be leaving Babylon 5 in about 10 minutes. He should already be boarding a flight to her. I don't know how you did it, Jacobson breathed a sigh of relief, but I am very grateful to you, Captain, and to you, Lord Baal.
I hope my request didn't cause you any inconvenience. John looked at me. Not at all, Captain Sheridan. I smile. The doctor and I whiled away the time with interesting conversation and wonderful tea. Glad to hear it. Well,
Dr. Jacobson, the captain smiled. I suppose you should also find yourself a more comfortable place for the next few months until the hype about your search dies down completely.
I think you're right, but where should I go? I think Dr. Franklin has already thought of something. I'll take you to the med bay. Yes, perhaps. Jacobson finished his tea, putting the cup on the saucer, and rose to his feet. Thank you, Lord Ball, for your help and for the conversation. It's always a pleasure to talk to an intelligent, educated person, Doctor. I stand up from my chair with a smile, giving Jacobson a short bow.